Chapter 850. Hurry up, Huaisher. Hurry up, or it'll be too late. Huaisher gasped. In the darkness, under the moonlight, he clenched the pickaxe in his hand. He tried his best to shovel the soil under his feet. He was sweating, but he didn't dare to stop. He was pulled by an invisible fear and couldn't stop. The shadow behind him swelled in the moonlight, laughing silently. It was like looking down, watching him throw away the soil and sink little by little, as if he was digging his own grave, until his shovel suddenly hit something invisible, causing sparks to fly. Huaisher was stunned for a moment. He stretched out his trembling hand, pushed the soil away, and glimpsed the cold heart of stone. Under the soil, someone laughed softly. It was so mocking. As Huaisher retreated in horror, a hand reached out from the self-dug grave and gripped his wrist tightly. Amidst the dirt and dust, a face that belonged to him appeared. He raised his head and smiled at Huaisher. "Huaisher, what are you looking for?" Darkness came. The rain fell, and the sound of a train came from afar. The cemetery was bleak. Huaisher stood in front of the tombstone, staring at the picture of his grandfather on the tombstone. He heard the quarrel behind him. A man and a woman, hysterical and impatient, argued with each other, as if they wanted to push the mistakes of the world to each other. Even if the funeral was not over, they were haggling over every penny as they discussed the distribution of each inheritance. When Huaisher finally gathered his courage and turned around, the voice disappeared without a trace. Only two skeletons were left in the thin rain, quietly looking at him with their dark eye sockets. Huaisher's vision turned dark. He covered his face tiredly, but suddenly the mocking voice sounded again from all around. During the break after class, the boys surrounded him and laughed mockingly. They pushed him, kicked him, and looked at the wooden man with his head lowered, waiting for him to resist. "He's a thief. He's been here several times." An impatient middle-aged woman tugged at his collar and pulled out the things in his hand. "You're still lying to me. Where did you get the money to buy these things?" The collar suddenly grew teeth and ate him from the inside. He opened his eyes and saw the world rolling and contracting again. Everyone was spasming, and their skin cracked like lotus flowers. The blood within the lotus surged and swallowed him. Nightmares, endless nightmares. In the endless darkness, Huaisher felt as if there were invisible tentacles wrapping around him bit by bit, shrinking, pulling, layer upon layer, making him fall towards the deepest part of the quagmire, reliving all the pain. There was no end. Huaisher watched everything calmly. From beginning to end, he did not say a word. He waited quietly until she returned to the desolate world in the decadent forest and saw the haggard man on the horse again. He wandered around aimlessly. However, this time, there were countless staggering figures behind his horse. He was like a walking corpse. He walked forward numbly. There was no longer any light in his empty eyes. They were only filled with darkness and pain. Along with that person, he turned around and looked at Huaisher. Once again, he begged humbly, "Please, mourn for him." That hoarse plea was like thunder, sounding from the depths of his soul again. It echoed continuously, filling every corner and will, not allowing him to think or refute. Huaisher closed his eyes. He took a deep, deep breath. He was serious and solemn. He made an answer. Just like the barbarian detective Conan in the comics, when he was lost in the night, he encountered a former researcher of the villain organization who had also been injected with a muscle-strengthening drug by the villain and turned into a giant. He roared at the other party across a long distance. "Mourn for you." In an instant, he burst out and broke free from the shackles of a dream. He clenched his fists and punched the other party's face with all his strength. Boom! At that moment, the weak dream collapsed under Crow's gaze. Huaisher woke up from the long nightmare. He panted violently. He only heard the sound of wheels turning. In this short trance, he felt his body shaking slightly, as if he was sitting in a carriage. He didn't even realize where he was. The long dream had exhausted all his energy. He wiped the cold sweat on his face and only felt a wave of exhaustion and weakness in his limbs. He finally understood why those survivors fell into madness. But now he suspected that he had also gone crazy. He realized that he was sitting on a tricycle, and his body was swaying along with the sound of the wheels. He was moving forward in the dark and long tunnel. His friendly puppy was sitting opposite him, biting a piece of meat with its tongue hanging out. It didn't know where it was and wasn't vigilant at all. A low voice sounded from the other side. "Hey, you're finally awake." The voice said, "You were going to cross the border, right? You almost walked into the ambush of those damn things." Huaisher froze for a moment. "When I found you, I almost thought you were dead. Are you okay? Do you want a cigar?" Accompanied by a cracking sound, the skeletal hand grabbed a cigar that had already cracked and brought it in front of him. Huaisher looked up blankly and saw half a skeleton? Yes, it was only the upper half of the skeleton. It looked like it had just crawled out of formalin and had a pungent smell. It was wearing an orange-yellow miner's hat on its head. On the skeleton, there were a lot of gold chains, iron plates, and so on. There were also 2 limited edition cigarette cards. Now, it was looking up at Huaisher, chewing a cigar in its mouth. It didn't light it, it just chewed. In the dark eye sockets, a little white mouse timidly poked its head out to look at Huaisher, then immediately retracted and hid in its empty skull. Corpses can talk? Huaisher was dumbfounded. Without a doubt, this was a skeleton, and from the color of the bones, it seemed to have been dead for a long time. There was no brain, no flesh, no organs, and no origin substance fluctuations. But it could still move and chew on a cigar. It also didn't have vocal cords, but it could still make sounds. Wow, talking like that is so rude. The skeleton opened its mouth and spat out the tobacco leaves in its mouth. "This thing doesn't taste good at all. Why do so many people like it?" That's used to light it? The skeleton was stunned. "Really?" "Yes, it's probably used to light the other end after cutting off one end to smoke." Huaisher gestured for a long time before the skeleton finally understood. It found a lighter from the trash on the floor of the tricycle and lit it under Huaisher's guidance. It wanted to take a deep breath. But of course, without lungs, nothing could be sucked out. But in a place like this, it was very reasonable. But even if it sucked out the nicotine, this skeleton didn't have a nose or flesh to absorb it. The skeleton glanced regretfully at the smoking cigar and mumbled in realization. "So that's how it is? I was wondering what was wrong. Anyway, thank you so much." It's nothing. Huaisher forced a smile. He looked around and asked tentatively, "Were you the one who put me on the tricycle?" "Yeah, I almost thought you were dead. I wanted to dig a hole and bury you, but your friend told me that you were still alive and would be fine after drinking some water. That's why I brought you back." The skeleton raised its eye sockets and looked at him. "You look very energetic, unlike the others who go crazy after a night's sleep. Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Do you want some medicine?" "Medicine? Yeah, let me see. I have." The skeleton rummaged through the trash on the ground and took out a lot of unlabeled medicine. "I picked these up from a warehouse. They should be effective for you, right?" "I'll pass." Huaisher rubbed the bridge of his nose and tried to clear his thoughts. He had to figure out the cause and effect. Roughly speaking, Huaisher, Damba's little tyrant, came to space and arrived at Helios. He was trapped here by his teammates, chased by a group of monsters, and almost startled something strange. After hiding for a long time and escaping, he fell into a coma and was picked up by a skeleton. "Hey, brother, do me a favor." The skeleton suddenly spoke and interrupted his thoughts. "Can you talk to your friend and ask him to return my great rotor to me?" Huaisher was stunned for a moment. He looked at the dog and realized that this dog was actually grinding its teeth on someone's pelvis bone. After struggling for a long time, he finally snatched the bone from the dog's mouth and put it back into the skeleton. The skeleton let out a long breath and tried to twist its lower body that had no legs. It seemed to have let out a long breath and felt a lot more comfortable. Brother, I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask." Huaisher scratched his head and asked tentatively, "May I ask, what are you?" The skeleton was stunned for a moment and immediately replied with a trembling voice, "I don't know either." Huaisher's expression twitched. 10 minutes later, the skeleton picked up starch pieces and fed them to the little white mouse living in its skull. At the same time, it explained to Huaisher, "I woke up from the pile of corpses half a month ago and was already like this. I don't know what happened. It felt like I suddenly jumped out of thin air. I also wanted to find someone to ask what I was, but everyone was dead. No one cared about me. Other than the two of you, the only living thing I found was this little thing. But I asked for a long time, and it didn't seem to be able to speak. The skeleton shrugged regretfully and made a crunching sound. I was hoping that you would know and wanted to ask you. Who would have thought that you know less than me? At this point, its tone became gloomy. Could it be that I'm the only one left of my species? No, no, no. If you want to talk about corpses, there are countless of them in the entire Discovery realm. It's just that no skeleton can move and talk like you. Huaishir carefully observed it and found that it seemed to be a product of some kind of alchemy, but he couldn't imagine what kind of alchemy could create such a thing. He couldn't think of anyone who would be so bored. The most important thing was that there was no sign of any secret mechanism at all, as if it was naturally formed. What was this? The dead came back to life? Huaishir scratched his head and asked curiously, then, do you still remember your name? Ah. The skeleton was stunned for a moment and scratched its head. It was as if it had never thought about this question before. My name? What's my name? It muttered dully, as if it was trying hard to remember, but it couldn't be sure. It muttered to itself, I think I'm called Pubu. Pubu what? Pubu? Amidst Huaishir's sudden shock, the skeleton raised his head in realization and snapped his fingers. I think I'm called Publius. What? Huaishir cried out in surprise. Chapter 851. 10 minutes later, in the rickety little car, Huaishir came back to his senses and took a deep breath. He wanted to confirm the situation once again. Name? He asked, staring at the big brother skeleton in front of him. Abba. Prolov? The skeleton hesitated. Why are you talking about biology again? Huaishir wanted to pull his hair. Didn't you just say Pulos? Apart from the word Pulos, there's nothing else. The skeleton spread its hands innocently. I'm not sure either. The corner of Huaishir's eyes twitched. He asked again, what about the gender? Male, I think. The skeleton replied. Probably. Huaishir felt that he had almost used up a year's worth of deep breaths in one day. He rubbed his throbbing head and finally asked, what about the age? Guess what? The skeleton slapped its rotor and said with grief and indignation, I forgot. All right, the name was uncertain, the gender was uncertain, and the age was even more uncertain. It was completely unreliable. A mysterious skeleton who called himself Publius? A skeleton that picked him up like trash when he was unconscious was actually a grandmaster who had died a long time ago. This wasn't an ordinary level of absurdity. The moon prison was so heavily guarded, regardless of how he had managed to escape. But wasn't Publius dead? The news of his death should have been thoroughly verified by the moon prison. Even a grandmaster couldn't be so ridiculous as to fake his death to fool the Astronomy Society, right? But what had appeared here was Pulo's unique technique, the spirit of dissent. Huaishir had originally been prepared to fight until the end of the game, but he hadn't expected that such a thing would suddenly jump in front of him. Well, to be exact, he had been picked up by someone. Thinking of this, Huaishir couldn't help but glare hatefully at the stupid dog. It was still wagging its tongue and laughing foolishly. It had forgotten who it was after giving it a bone. It had bitten off someone else's rotor and sold him out. Huaishir rubbed his chin and fell in a deep thought. If it really belonged to Publius, why didn't it kill him? After this period of experience, he had come to the conclusion that whether it was Mikhail, Garland, or Publius, all the grandmasters were always a little out of their minds. If he really wanted to be kind to others, why would he throw the descending spirit everywhere? Furthermore, the cruel act of using humans as alchemists was not something that this silly skeleton would do. It had no idea what Huaishir was thinking about. It was still happily holding its little white mouse in its hands as it sat on the plane. Huff, huff, huff. She looked so happy that even Huaishir was envious. Do you remember anything? He asked. No, I forgot all about it. All I know is that this damn place is Helios. There are still a lot of messy things in my head that I can't match. The skeleton scratched its head and said, I think I was drinking, eating, and joking with my uncles and aunt a few days ago. But do I have any uncles and aunts? Did you see them on the way here? I don't know how many corpses I've seen, but I don't know which one of them is your uncle. Huaishir scratched his head in despair for a long time. He accidentally pulled out a strand of hair, which made him even more distressed. The world was so complicated and the development was so strange. If this went on, in a few hundred years, he would probably be as bald as you Dongri. It was really heartbreaking. Then I've been hanging around here for such a long time? Huaishir asked doubtfully. Nothing happened. Those damned things rarely come to the lower levels. This is a place to dispose of garbage. Moreover, they don't seem to recognize me. Probably to them, I'm no different from a corpse. The skeleton shook its head and sighed. It stroked the little white mouse in its eye socket with its fingers. Fishball is especially miserable. It was targeted several times and was almost eaten yesterday. Look, it's missing a part of its butt. Why do you call it fishball? Because I picked it up from a bag of fish balls. The skeleton said matter-of-factly, I've already planned. You were picked up from the side of a dog. If you can't remember your name like me, I'll call you a go from now on. King a go. Huaishir was shocked. He pointed at the broken dog next to him and asked, Then what's its name? I'll call it Go. I found it in a cave, so I'll call it a dong. The skeleton laughed proudly. Its chin and bones rubbed against each other. It even grabbed a part of its arm to tease the broken dog. It was not angry when the broken dog broke it. The broken tricycle finally stopped in a remote tunnel. Huaishir got off the tricycle and studied it for a long time. He did not see any high-tech equipment on the tricycle. It was just an ordinary tricycle. It did not have a pathfinding function, nor did it have a speed control. It was even a pedal. How could it move by itself? How did you do it? He asked curiously. Isn't it very simple? The skeleton raised its hand and pointed at the runes on the handle and wheel. You see this, and this. I think it can move. It was not until now that Huaishir saw the ancient and complicated alchemy runes under the scratches and cracks. The skeleton's mastery was obviously better than most of the alchemists that Huaishir had seen. How can this work? It was as if he had seen a retard solve the Riemann hypothesis by just drawing a few lines on a piece of paper. Huaishir was shocked for a whole year. While he was still in a daze, he subconsciously helped the skeleton to pick up the things it had picked up from the cart. Then he watched as the skeleton relied on its own upper body to jump nimbly and landed on a tattered handcart. The wheels started moving on their own and carried him forward. Here. The skeleton raised its hand and forcefully pushed aside a broken metal plate, revealing the crack behind it and the scene behind it. It was like a small library, but now it was filled with all kinds of strange things. A broken refrigerator had been dismantled and the door was used as a display cabinet, but it was filled with all kinds of strange small clay figurines. An overturned, broken alchemy cauldron had been turned into a coffee table, and a beaker and an alcohol lamp had been turned into a teapot. There was even a large storage box that was padded with insulating cotton and made into a small bed. But ever since he boarded Helios, Huaishir clearly felt the breath of life for the first time. In this place full of horror and death, there was a faint smell of fresh vegetation in the air. It was the seeds that were slowly growing and germinating in the wood chips in the basin. The touch of green made people's tense consciousness faintly relax. Welcome. The skeleton turned around, clapped its hands, and said enthusiastically, Sit anywhere. I'll make tea. Before Huaishir could refuse, the skeleton hummed a little tune and ran to the corner of the kitchen. This big brother skeleton chewed on his cigar like it was an eggplant. Who knew what kind of tea it would make? Just as he found a stool to sit down, he saw that the lousy dog had already dug its head into the pile of junk and started chasing after the frightened white mouse. It was hungry. Didn't this thing know that there was something in this world called the chicken god? Huaishir was so scared that he hurriedly picked it up and held it down. After another round of human and dog fighting, the room was already half in chaos. When he looked in the direction of the kitchen, he felt a sense of suffocation. The big pot used to boil water was clearly a filtrate reactor that had not been seen many times in the present realm, but now it had been dismantled and used as a pot. If he was not wrong, the tattered book that the skeleton casually tore up to ignite the fire was the priceless treasure that had been auctioned off at the Magic Gold Bank. A brief introduction to the 4 transformations of the Philosopher's Stone, the epic-making discovery that was said to open a new realm of forbidden smelting, the only one in the entire realm. It was given a Huaishur right in front of him. No, I can't look. I'm still young. This scene is too exciting. I might have a brain hemorrhage. He hurriedly forced himself to look away. When he suddenly looked back, he saw the photo that was originally hanging on the wall of the library. He was attracted by the old group photo. It was like a graduation ceremony. Everyone was smiling as they sent off their companion's departure and arrival. This was a farewell and reunion that only happened once in 70 years. At the front of the crowd, only one person had a cold expression and did not smile, as if he was too lazy to care about these boring things and did not want to waste time on this meaningless social interaction. That handsome and dignified face made Huaishur stunned. Huaishur rubbed his eyes and stared at it carefully. Galander. There was no doubt that it was indeed the appearance of Galander when he was young. Galander, the skeleton, who was busy in front of the iron pot, asked in confusion, "Isn't that your name? Why do you add Wong? Self-proclaimed? You outsiders are really strange." What? Huaishur was puzzled. I mean, Galander Van Helt. The skeleton turned around and asked, "Isn't that your name?" No. Who said so? Huaishur was alert. Didn't I tell you that my name is Huaishur long ago? I thought that you people in the present realm might have 1 or 2 names. The skeleton sighed. But if you are not him, why do you carry his identity card with you? It's that key. The skeleton pointed to his pocket. With that, the whole of Helios will know that you are Galander Bang. Before he could finish, the key had been completely broken by the furious Huaishur. It was crushed into pieces. He finally understood the origin of all the abnormalities he had experienced, including the reason for the strange gaze and the source of the near-death experience. Had he been carrying Galander's name above his head for so long, and had become a scapegoat for that old bastard? He did not know how many days that bastard had done such infuriating things in Helios that he did not even dare to board the ship. Instead, he wanted to be a pawn for him to cross the river and test the waters for him. It was like being struck by lightning with no conscience. Fine, don't let me catch you, old bastard. Huaishur gritted his teeth and suppressed his anger. If you want me to find a way out, I will scatter your ashes in 3 days. Come, don't be angry. Have some tea first. It's my first time making it, so I'm a little unfamiliar with it. I don't know how it tastes. The skeleton came over with a beaker and stuffed it into his hand. Then, he clinked his own cup with his own. Cheers! After that, he tilted his head back and drank. Then the wet tea spilled out of his mouth and spilled all over the skeleton. It looked quite nutritious. The little dog next to him was already drooling. Bone soup. Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the muddy leaves floating in the cup. Other than the 2 plants that had been thrown in when the water boiled, he did not know what it was like with tea. Was this thing really drinkable? However, he could not refuse the skeleton's expectant gaze. He could not smell any poison, nor did he feel any premonition of death. Tentatively, he took a sip. Then his eyes lit up. It was difficult to describe the taste at that moment. He had never drunk such sweet tea before. By the time he reacted, he had already finished the tea in 1 gulp. Then a warm current spread from his body, immersing his limbs and bones in the warmth. His body, which was full of hidden injuries, actually began to heal rapidly. It was as if he had taken all kinds of supplements. Even his source form began to recover rapidly. The tremors in his soul also quickly calmed down, and he was full of energy. Red and blue were full. Even his attributes had been increased. Even the title page of the Book of Destiny had the buffs of warm sun in winter, spring of life, and high-speed healing. Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the beaker in his hand. He wanted nothing more than to eat the entire beaker. What kind of tea is this? It's tea. What's different about it? The skeleton didn't understand and asked, maybe it's because it's my first time, so it's different from outside. How about I add some sugar next time? You should be from Dongxia, right? You Dongxia people don't add vinegar when drinking tea, do you? No, it's not this. Huaisher carefully looked at it for a while and discovered that this thing really was just ordinary tea. It was just something that was casually brewed after boiling water and adding some black tea powder and mint leaves. If there were no problems with the ingredients, then the problem lay with the skeleton. Huaisher looked at this somewhat amusing fellow, half believing and half doubting. When he thought about the little three-wheeled motorcycle, he couldn't help but begin to believe it. Could it really be that this fellow was a martial grandmaster? It was like turning something rotten into something magical. Ah, were you looking at this just now? I remember that there were names at the back. The skeleton reached out and picked up the photo on the wall, flipped it over, and compared it with the names at the back. Let me see 19 souvenirs. Welcome Hades, Garland, Publius, Bruss. Wow, so the two of us have such a good relationship. Huaisher forgot to explain that he wasn't that old bastard. His gaze was once again attracted by the photo. On the back of the photo were the names of the participants in the front row, from left to right. He looked at Garland's cold face when he was young. Next to him, the black-haired young man with a ponytail affectionately raised his hand and placed it on Garland's shoulder, smiling at the camera. He made a V sign, warm and sunny. Was that the young Publius? In other words, he had also stayed on Helios before. Chapter 852. On the Moon, the original site of the Kepler base. The messy rescue scene was separated by a pure white temporary oxygen shed. Inside, where the extreme cold had yet to dissipate, the investigators took off their helmets, lowered their heads, and stared at the eyeless corpse in front of them. Has the identity of a deceased been determined? Asked the captain from the Central Bureau, who was directly under the decision-making room. It has been confirmed with the Silver Monument Workshop. This corpse is the workshop's alchemist, Ragnar himself. The assistant replied. According to the restoration of the scene and the investigation of scholars, the identity of the murderer has also been identified. It's William Buckle, the head of security at the Kepler base. Is there a grudge between the two sides? No. Since William came here to be the head of security 10 years ago, he has never quarreled with anyone outside of work. Everyone knows that he has a good temper. The assistant said, with Ragnar's personality, he should also disdain to have conflicts with people from the same base. Well, let me guess. The captain, who had not slept for almost 48 hours, squatted on the ground and stared at the corpse's empty eye sockets. He suddenly said, "This William Buckle, before coming to the Kepler base, should have served in the dark side prison, right?" The assistant was stunned. He immediately looked down at the screen in his hand and pulled up the file, but part of it was blocked. It was top secret. There's no need to look. Apart from the dark side prison, only the 6th Research Institute has such top secret files on the moon. It's absolutely impossible for the people of the 6th Research Institute to be outside. The captain rubbed his face. Use my name and send a letter to the dark side prison to inquire. In less than 5 minutes, the exact reply appeared on the assistant screen. Just as the captain had guessed, William Buckle had indeed served in the dark side prison for 12 years before coming here. The area of service was the first floor of Zone B, the place where the Grand Master Publius was detained. What a strange coincidence. We ran into each other just like that, right? The captain's eyes stared at the corpse, but his empty gaze fell on the void, becoming gloomy and frightening. The servicemen of the dark side prison are never allowed to return to the present world for the rest of their lives. They can only look for jobs on the moon and the border. As compensation, they will all have a well-paid and lofty position in various bases and departments. He paused for a moment, then turned around and ordered, "Check the whereabouts of the guards on the B1 floor over the years after they retired." 15 minutes later, the report appeared in front of the captain. Over the past 90 years, a total of 141 guards had resigned from the B1 level. Among them, 34 voluntarily stayed in the dark side prison and transferred to the logistics unit. 40 went to the border, and the rest were scattered in the major research bases on the moon. However, upon closer inspection, they discovered that out of the hundreds and thousands of organizations on the huge moon, more than 11 people had come to the narrow area between the Ocean of Storms and the Sea of Islands. Moreover, without exception, all of them died a violent death in various accidents. When was the last death reported? The captain asked. 70 years ago, the assistant said. Since then, no one has been transferred to the Kepler area until William retired 2 years ago. That's when the two wheels are docked at the Helios workshop. The captain laughed mockingly. Then, help me take a look at Grandmaster Publilius's medical records. When did his origin substance begin to deteriorate and his soul begin to shrink? 991 years ago, in the long silence, the captain lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth and muttered to himself. 20 years had passed. He was already preparing to break out of prison at that time. Publilius? Grandmasters are indeed grandmasters. None of them can be underestimated. The assistant was stunned. Isn't Publilius dead? Yes, he's dead, but the problem is, how do you define a person's death, my friend? The captain laughed. He raised his hand and pointed at his forehead. Is it the destruction of the physical body or the dissipation of the soul? It's just a corpse. What does that mean? Isn't it impossible to find any remnants of the soul at the scene? It's not the corrosion of the cursed bullets. Let's not talk about why someone would go through so much trouble to charge into the dark side, prison to kill an old bastard who has been forgotten by the entire world. What if, and I'm saying, what if there's even the slightest possibility? What if his soul was already no longer here before he was killed? The captain looked up, his eyes shining with understanding. What if he had already broken out of prison before that? That's right, he had broken out of prison. Grandmaster Publilius had single-handedly accomplished a heroic feat that no one had been able to accomplish for hundreds of years. He had escaped from the dark side prison. In fact, if it weren't for the recent abnormalities in the moon's surveillance system and the strange events at Kepler crater, which had attracted the attention of the Astronomical Society, no one would have been able to find any clues. Only the professional hunting dogs of the Dark Side Army had such a keen sense of smell. They had smelled something unusual from the seemingly ordinary death. Tony, what do you think? The captain asked. I'll sit and watch. Horse-faced man, who was smoking next to him, shrugged. I'm still on vacation. Boss, it's one thing to be dragged here to work overtime, but do you really want me to be a supporting character? At this time, we need to use your thoughts to verify it. The captain stood up and suddenly asked, if you were Grandmaster Publilius, what price would you pay in order to obtain your freedom? Tony laughed softly, grinning under his mask as if he could empathize with the captain's feelings. He could understand the captain's determination, which had long since surpassed that of ordinary people. Of course, I would pay any price, he was certain of this, even if he himself was part of the price. Then, the answer was clear. The first known condition was that Grandmaster Publilius specialized in the study of human origin substances. The second known condition was that 91 years ago, Publilius's soul had begun to show signs of collapse due to old age, and his origin substances had begun to dissipate. Until recently, he had already lost all ability to use alchemy right before his death. The third known condition was that all of the people who had retired from the Dark Side prison area, be one who had come to the vicinity of Kepler base, had all died unnatural deaths for various reasons. The fourth known condition was Publilius's inhuman obsession with miracles and the grave mistake he had made because of it. In order to accomplish some goal, in order to escape from this place, he didn't hesitate to kill himself. But is something like this even possible? Tony asked. Isn't this a bit too sensational? Don't forget, he's a grandmaster, Tony, the captain said. Perhaps a level 5 ascended cultivator has a limit, but to a grandmaster, as long as he's well prepared, nothing is impossible. Besides, what's this trifling suicide? The only thing that the prison couldn't isolate was the desire of the soul. He was thinking. He had been thinking. To him, as long as he wanted to escape from this place. The two of them glanced at each other. They didn't say anything, but at the same time, they felt an indescribable chill. They both understood what that man, who longed for freedom, had done in this world's strictest security and lockdown, under the watchful eyes of everyone present, had done. Countless long nights, enduring unprecedented pain, bit by bit, tearing apart his own soul. He relied on strand after strand of origin substance to implant the shattered souls into the guards that were right in front of him. In order to avoid triggering surveillance, the origin substance had to be extremely thin, hidden in his words, his thoughts, and his line of sight. Relying on the occasional exchange of glances, his unanswered complaints, and his moans when he spoke to the doctor. Severing his own soul, tearing it to shreds, then fusing it with someone else's soul. Finally, he reformed it and allowed them to take away a portion of his soul. Once and then again, he created a hell from his own soul, then extracted the essence of freedom from this narrow hell day after day. As a result, the origin substance gradually became scarce, and his soul gradually collapsed. This painful suicide had been repeated for 90 years. How many times had he succeeded, and how many times had he failed? Apart from Pubris, no one else knew. Every time someone left, they would take a portion of his body and the remains of his soul with them. Like a seed that had been planted, it silently grew and waited until one day, when the sender heard a certain piece of news, saw a certain item, or had an unusual dream. In the end, it ushered in an irreversible erosion and transformation, becoming a part of Grandmaster Publius. If this is true, he has at least divided his soul into 11 parts. No, if we include William, it should be 12 parts. Tony sighed. Is this really possible? Don't forget, Tony. He's a master. As long as he could pay the price, he was an omnipotent master. The captain put out his cigarette and said softly, "For such an inhuman existence, what is impossible? If we write a report based on such groundless speculation, the higher-ups won't believe it, right? Isn't that so?" The captain stood up and glanced at the corpse on the ground one last time. But apart from this, what else is there to write? After all, it is a possibility. As for how to verify it, we'll leave it to the higher-ups to have a headache. 3 hours later, in a separate bedroom in the temporary base at Kepler Crater, the captain completed his 6th investigation report. After drinking a small glass of wine, he wrapped himself in a blanket and fell into a deep sleep. Snoring sounds could be heard. This report was sent to the present location through the satellite between the Earth and the Moon. 1 minute later, it arrived at the London extension and was transferred to the central decision room on the aerial floor. After an analysis team of more than 600 people received a preliminary review, they summarized and gathered the information. Half an hour later, they submitted the 3rd batch of findings and speculations. After the Axis organization checked and calculated, this report was transmitted to the higher-level organization 15 minutes later. After another hour, the meeting ended. After the video conference, Secretary General Yeager sat in his study in his pajamas. He smoked a cigarette but didn't drink. He lowered his head and signed a new order. In the 7th hour, an emergency regulation state was ushered in on the Moon. After everyone was forced to stop all activities, they went to the 13 sanctuaries. At the same time, the orbit of the Moon began to adjust for the 4th time. Under the emergency situation, the gravitational force of the Moon was temporarily disconnected. After the adjustment of the orbital inclination angle was completed, the huge star rotated once and accelerated slightly. With the effect of the gravitational slingshot, it broke away from the orbit, leaving behind a simulated moonlight hanging in the sky of the Moon. And in the intertwining of countless star orbits, silver-white dust rose from the back of the Moon in the eternal darkness. In the vacuum, the Moon sea collapsed. 47 ring-shaped metal creations with a diameter of 6 kilometers spewed out blue flames and rose into the universe. They seemed to be penetrated by an invisible axis and extended straight out. They were aimed in the direction of Jupiter, close to the eye of the devil. In the center of countless concentric circles, under the cracked shell of the Moon, a pure metal object that had been silent for more than 60 years waited quietly. A heavy cannon with a mass comparable to that of a medium-sized island was ready to fire. Waiting quietly, waiting for the results of the observation, waiting for the arrival of the war. At the same time, under the aim of the heavy cannon, Huaishur, who was sleeping, struggled for a moment and felt suffocated. He was about to be suffocated by the dog lying on his face. Chapter 853. The next day, when Huaishir woke up from the continuous nightmares, he smacked his mouth full of dog fur and did not come back to his senses for a long time. Unexpectedly, he didn't dream of the ghost coming to visit him to pay his condolences. It was as if he had just woken up from a long nap in the afternoon. His body, which had been heavily injured in the past few days, was recovering quickly. For some reason, he felt suffocated when he was sleeping. He had only slept for a few hours, but it felt like he had been suffocating for 24 hours. In the room, Skeleton was still happily playing with Lord of the Flies. He was like a child playing with a pad, trying out all kinds of random functions. It even learned how to control the voice. "Hello, Xiaobia, play some music." Lord of the Flies rolled his eyes on the cover. "No, thanks." "Xiaobia, show the picture." "No, goodbye." Skeleton was not angry. Instead, it said patiently, "Xiaobia, tell me a story." After being annoyed by this curious kid for the whole night, Beelzebub was about to break down. He yelled, "WDNMD, are you done?" Skeleton was stunned. Then it became curious. "What does WDNMD mean?" Beelzebub was silent. Feeling Huaishir's condemning gaze, he felt even more guilty. He coughed for a long time and said, This is short for I have to get a mother tape." After a flash of inspiration, he started to think and started to talk nonsense. "Well, don't you want to listen to songs and tell stories? My body is quite old. I can't play it without a tape." "Oh." Skeleton suddenly understood. Then it asked curiously, "What's a tape? Is the mother tape its mother?" F***ck. Beelzebub's steel body twitched for a long time. He almost broke his non-existent teeth. Tears were streaming down his face. "I'm Osiris's main intelligence. How did I become a parenting robot? It would be fine if it was a child, but it was a skeleton that did not even know what it was for the whole night, from the present world to the border, from daily necessities to the internet, and all kinds of terms. He was almost driven crazy by Skeleton's questions. "Do you really think you're an electronic dictionary?" Huaishir looked at him with pity and made a hand gesture. "Thank you for your hard work. I'll add another gigabit to your broadband when we get back." They had no choice. They were alone in a foreign land with no help. It was rare to find a local in a place like Helios. Even if he might be the grandmaster behind all this, they still had to unite. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what was going on. After Skeleton finished asking his questions, Huaishir finally found a chance to interject while he was cooking for the white mouse, Fishball. He began to inquire about the information he wanted. The first and most crucial thing was the escape pod. "What's that?" The skeleton scratched its skull. "Uncle, what are you talking about?" "Are you talking about my cousin?" "I don't know." After a long time, Huaishir finally explained that the escape capsule was not his relative. It was the kind of thing that could breathe in space after leaving Helios. Oh, you're talking about those big iron balls, right?" Skeleton suddenly understood. Huaishir's eyes suddenly lit up. Then he clapped his hands and shrugged. Gone. What the hell?" Huaishir's eyes darkened not long after it lit up. "Gone." "Yes." Skeleton nodded. "When I first woke up, I saw a lot of people rushing into the cabin. They were squeezing and squeezing into the cabin. After they squeezed in, they didn't fly far before they all exploded. If you didn't tell me that it was an escape pod, I would have thought that it was some kind of automatic cremation machine." "What the F***ck automatic cremation machine?" Hearing that the escape pod could be turned into a bomb, how could Huaishir not understand that the group of refugees had most likely stepped into someone else's trap? But the question was, what exactly happened on Helios? What was the Grandmaster Publilius trying to do? He couldn't figure out at all with this skeleton who didn't know anything. He was getting more and more bald. But soon, after disappearing for a night, Tangi's phantom returned once again, and words appeared in the Book of Destiny. "This is also alchemy, Huaishir." Huaishir couldn't help but roll his eyes. Could everything be alchemy? Everything can be alchemy. You can alchemy gold, he can alchemy silver, I can alchemy iron. As long as one has the heart, anyone can become a grandmaster. What else do you think alchemy is? Tangi laughed. It's the last magic left behind by the gods of the old era. It's a ritual that imitates the authority of the gods. To put it simply, It's no different from the Great Spirit Dance. But it's different from the Great Spirit Dance because the object it uses is not the present realm, but the abyss itself. Why sure, alchemy itself is a tool created by the gods to explore the mysteries of hell. It was the embodiment of the dual nature of disaster and miracle. Because of this, as long as it involved the transformation of disaster and miracle, it would inevitably belong to the system of alchemy. Even the sacred mark was a crystallization created by alchemy. The ascendant transcended the silver sea and obtained his own soul. Wasn't this also a type of alchemy reaction? Tangi said indifferently, "Now, what you see before you is a miracle furnace rarely seen in the entire realm. It's a great ritual that's almost on par with the Tower of Babylon." Was this Publius' work? Huaishur came to his senses and immediately looked at the skeleton. Suspicion appeared in his eyes. This guy can't be playing me, right? Don't waste your time, Huaishur. Tangi flapped her little wings and said sympathetically, "That's just a remnant of the past. It's hard to say whether it's Publius or something else now. Moreover, have you ever felt any malice from it? Even if you've obtained a little bit of Publius memory, it's just a newborn that's only been in this world for half a month. Please quickly reflect on yourself. Isn't your heart too dark? Aren't you the one who led me to think that?" Huaishur was angry. Why was he taking the blame again? Also, what the hell was she talking about the great ritual and the miracle furnace? "It's the present Helios himself," Tangi replied. "Do you still remember the essence of alchemy? Every gain must have a loss." Yes. Although it's not exactly correct, it's not far from it. To a certain extent, this involves the foundation of physics and is also the prerequisite for the establishment of alchemy. And from this, the concept of the conservation of miracles was triggered. Most of the processes of alchemy are to breed fertile soil that represents chaos in a closed environment. Then, the essence that one needs is extracted in all kinds of ways, and what is abandoned are meaningless residues. In other words, if the meaningless residue is not removed, it's impossible to create a true work. Huaishur rolled his eyes. Every time Tangi wanted to keep him in suspense, she would say a bunch of nonsense that he already knew. But soon after, he came to a realization and understood what Tongji meant. There were no miracles that were born out of thin air. Matter or energy might be infinite, but if one wanted to obtain a miracle, they would inevitably have to pay a price. As the clear air rose, there would inevitably be turbid air falling, and only in this way could the sky and earth be formed. Ascension and fall were equivalent, and they both followed the principle of disaster and miracle being two sides of the same coin. If the initial value was 0, then when 1 appeared, there would inevitably be the birth of -1 to maintain the balance of the total amount. The difference was that a profound alchemist could use secret methods, techniques, and even experience to make the benefits of the work itself outweigh the drawbacks. If it was a lousy newbie or a piece of trash that only knew how to mess up everything, they would probably only be able to hover around the ratio of 0 is equal to 0. And an apprentice who had just entered the door could already extract the precious essence of 1 out of 10 portions of abyss sediment, which was 1 is equal to 10. This was also one of the hard standards of the Stoneware Society for alchemist assessment. Although the criteria used to evaluate the results were complex, in the end, it could always be reduced to a direct result. However, even though the standard of this reality realm was good, what made people uncomfortable was that it was created by those damn otakus from the Golden Dawn. The group of solidifiers who threw themselves into the abyss were once talents that were hard to come by in 100 generations. Naturally, they had great foresight, and their evaluation could not be said to be inaccurate. But the price of having great foresight was that they had never considered space for the incompetent. The effort and talent required for every level up was almost equivalent to the previous level by several times. It cannot be said that it was not harsh. In the Stoneware Society's evaluation, only those who could reach the level of 4 is equal to 7 could shake off the title of apprentice and be called a true alchemist. Huaishur, on the other hand, was a problematic child who was severely biased in one subject. With the help of the alchemical fire, the hand of confinement, and the forger's skill, he barely managed to break through the threshold of 7 is equal to 4 and touch the edge of 8 is equal to 3. And this was only limited to the field of metal studies and his own soul equipment. If it were any other target, he would immediately be caught off guard and beaten back to his original state. He might not even reach the level of 6 is equal to 5. It was no wonder that the other alchemists who boarded Helios did not like him. How could a dog's heart and dog's face compete with the professionals who came from a professional class? As for the hard standard of being a grandmaster, it was the threshold of 10 is equal to 1. And this was just an imaginary number. At this level, the conversion ratio could no longer be measured with numbers. According to one's own strengths, the former could be almost infinitely large, or the latter could be infinitely small. The limit for ordinary people was just the starting point for alchemists. Everyone had their own unique skills. For example, the Grandmaster Mikhail was an expert in group alchemy and large-scale blacksmithing. The more people there were, the better. As long as there were enough qualified alchemists, the items that could be created would be bigger and faster. Fleischer didn't know much about that old bastard Garland, but he had heard that he was an expert in the creation of stigmata. Any stigmata that he created was, without exception, a divine item that could make a ascendant even more powerful. And when it came to Puberus, Fleischer knew nothing about him other than that he was an expert in the study of origin substances. From the looks of it, he's probably an expert in the area of divine carving, right? Origin substances are the seeds of divinity. That Grandmaster is probably not an easy person to deal with. Tanguy sighed softly. You can tell just by looking at what's in front of you. Fleischer finally understood what she meant. Right now, in the vast expanse of space on Jupiter, the sun's chariot, Helios, had been turned into a giant furnace by Puberus. Using the endless vacuum as a barrier, he had used the divine carvings of the Greek gods as a miracle furnace. After extracting the boundless energy from within, he had begun an unprecedented process. In front of them was a strange world, a hell that had been completely transformed. This was the residue that had been extracted from the miracle furnace. In fact, this wasn't even the limit. The depth was still decreasing at a frightening rate. The secret furnace was still operating. It still hadn't reached a conclusion. In that case, what exactly was he trying to achieve by turning all of Helios into a living hell? Fleischer felt a chill run down his spine. When he thought back to the gaze that had caused his scalp to go numb, he came to an unbelievable conclusion. Of course it's to create a god. Tanguy casually came up with an answer. Apart from Helios, where else can we find a place that is far away from the 3 great seals and is rich in divinity and divine power? Apart from this place, there was no other place that could allow him to achieve his goal, to recreate the gods that had died in the past. In the silence, Fleischer turned his head stiffly and looked at the dumbfounded skeleton next to him. He was dumbfounded. He was so energetic. Chapter 854. Fleischer was stunned for a long time by the sudden shock. After tearing up the emergency notice that he had picked up somewhere, he finally came to his senses. Whether it was true or not, this was definitely another big problem. What happened to the promised relaxing and happy trip? Why did everything blow up everywhere he went? He began to scratch his head. After a while, he realized that he had been scratching his head too often recently. He couldn't go on like this, or he would go bald. He could only grab the dog's head next to him and scratch it. After scratching for a long time, he still couldn't sort out his thoughts. Instead, he was bitten several times by the dog. He couldn't care less about beating the dog. The situation was serious. One Grandmaster was enough to stir up hell, but 2 had come above Helios. Garland definitely didn't come all the way here to applaud Publius and raise him up high. Who knew what other secrets he was hiding in his stomach? But Publius didn't hesitate to turn the whole of Helios into hell just to create a god. Was such a thing really possible? If it were really possible, what you would see would be heaven on earth instead of this tragic scene. Tanguy laughed mockingly. The so-called gods are actually very pitiful. They are the otherworldlings that came out of the pillar of God's essence, tools to carry out the will of heaven. No matter how impressive they seem, They're just necessary components to protect the world. They're no different from white blood cells and red blood cells, she said faintly. Now, the pillars of the present realm have been occupied by the three major blockades, and the gods that have survived in the past can only linger on. Wanting to create a god in such a world is no different from fishing for the moon in the water. Times have changed. In other words, he has no chance of succeeding? Huaishir didn't understand. Who knows? It just had to be in Helios, the last remnant of the gods' era. If you want to say, it's probably a 50-50 chance, Tangi said indifferently. Anyway, whether he succeeds or fails, it will be a disaster. If he fails, the whole of Helios will be buried because the consequences will be unbearable. But if he succeeds, Helios will still be buried because the consequences will be unacceptable. Speaking of this, she could not help but look up in the direction of the present realm and sighed. Maybe there are already guns and cannons on the moon aiming here. Once they find anything unusual, they will completely vaporize this place. Well, at that time, everyone would have at least 15 minutes to smoke a cigarette and take a break to experience the merry-go-round, reminiscing about the happy times in the past. This way, even if he became a ghost, it would be easy and pleasant. As if the friendly puppy screamed because Huaishir had accidentally pulled out 2 strands of dog fur. Huaishir was also furious. How'd he end up in front of his allies' cannons? It turned out that not only did the villains want to kill him, even his allies wanted to stab him in the back. Who is the real traitor here? Don't worry, you don't have to do it. Tangi comforted him. Even if everyone in the Stone Cauldron Society dies, Garland won't let Publius succeed. Once we lose the trust of the Astronomy Society, the foundation of the Stone Furnace Society will be shaken. When it comes to this matter, he should be the one who least wants Pubris to succeed. Hearing this, Huaishir only felt a sense of absurdity. The old bastard, who had wanted nothing more than to scatter his ashes, was now facing the same problem as him. It was just that he couldn't be considered an ally, and Huaishir didn't trust him anymore. Thinking about it carefully, the current situation was really a headache. The situation was as important as Mount Tai, and on his side there was only one man, one dog, and half a skeleton. The profits were small, and he had no idea where to start. Forget it, what's the point of thinking so much? When the skeleton finally finished his work in the kitchen, Huaishir picked up the bowl in front of him with a clear conscience. Let's eat, let's eat. How fragrant. In the distance, a faint rumble could be heard, and the whole of Helios began to faintly shake. It seemed to be a struggle. In the core of Helios, in the huge, secret array, endless light rose and surged, like an eternally inexhaustible fountain of miracles. And just outside the array under the light, a man in a long robe slowly walked over. In his hand, the heavy cane fell, making a low sound, causing the silent, huge silhouette in the light to move slightly, as if lowering its eyes and looking at him. A voice sounded in the air for no reason. What's the matter? The large group at the bottom has lost half of its members. The former chief alchemist of Helios, Hades, told him, Garland's speed is faster than expected, and the maze of the active layer can't trap him. After all, he was a grandmaster. No matter how old he was, no matter how declining he was still a grandmaster. Ever since he boarded Helios, the operation of the secret array had begun to have problems. He won't succeed, the voice said. I will cooperate with you. Those lunatics you created are hard to control, and they're all doing their own things. Hades frowned. If this goes on, the situation will be difficult to control. No, need to control. The silhouette in the light trembled. It was as if it was about to split, but it was forcefully mended. The voice also became more and more erratic, quickly fragmenting and difficult to piece together. Only the last murmur could be barely heard. Everything is a part of fate. This was the final step of the godly ascension ritual. In a long silence, Pubris did not speak again. After a long silence, Hades turned and left. In the empty space outside the gate of the core of Helios, countless figures sat in the darkness, bathed in the sediment of the abyss, inhaling and exhaling the poisonous breath of hell. I told you that autistic trash inside won't give you any ideas at all. Sitting in a chair and drinking, the destitute man, Coco, laughed. I will only tell you that everything is a part of fate. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. He actually placed the success or failure of the secret array on the illusory fate. Are you so angry that you want to beat him up? That's why I hate lunatics. Hades sighed. Why can't you be more rational? The followers of the Pied Piper persuading people to be rational is like the sheep of a rancher persuading people to be vegetarian. It's not persuasive at all. The man who was drinking shook the empty wine bottle in his hand, and the clear and sweet wine once again emerged, making him drink to his heart's content. Why don't you indulge in joy, my friend? He said. Don't worry. Leave everything to me. Hades withdrew his gaze and said nothing more. He waved his hand and left. Together with the aberrated followers and monsters behind him, he disappeared into the darkness. The man who was drinking was still guarding the door, drinking to his heart's content. Half a bottle was poured into his stomach. The other half of the bottle tilted and fell to the ground. It was like a feast of the undead here. In that instant, 100 miles away from here, the advancing formation that was separated by the maze formed by Helios suddenly paused. The alchemists of the Stoneforge Society raised their heads and looked above. They saw countless crimson, poisonous flames appear out of thin air and fall from the sky, instantly burning through the fog and spreading rapidly, devouring all the struggling victims. Soon, apart from the black iron coffin on the ground, there were only ashes left. But then, the ashes quickly rose from the ground and condensed into naked bodies. This time, they trampled on the flames. Their heads were towering. Salamanders' flame blood flowed in their bodies, making them fearless of all heat and flames. But then, the walls on both sides seemed to come alive, closing in on them with a loud bang. There was no tragic scene of flesh and bones turning into mud, because the steel walls were torn apart by the cyborgs in the lead. The burly alchemist, whose skin was suffused with the color of steel, stepped forward, raised a strange palette-like relic in his hand, and sprinkled it on everything in front of him. In an instant, countless flowing colors appeared out of thin air, flowing rapidly as if they were alive. Orange, dark green, lake blue, aquamarine, olive green, ochre, peach red. Those bright and simple colors spread rapidly, instantly softening everything in this strange place. And in the distance, at the bottom of the entire Helios, Huaishir, who was eating with a partner, paused. But he found that the world in front of him had become completely different. If he had to say something, the style seemed to be a little different, as if a filter had been installed and the color difference had been adjusted. What was even stranger was that even the originally delicious food was now glowing under the chopsticks. Wow, it looks so delicious. For some reason, little stars appeared in the eye sockets of the skull that had become a cartoon version of the big head. A genuine little star. Shocking. The whole world had suddenly become a two-dimensional world. After that, all the abnormalities disappeared. But the battle between the great masters was still going on. Just above Jupiter, in the distant deep sky, the son of Leviathan, who was riddled with holes, suddenly let out a high-pitched cry. They were charging straight at Helios. Countless thick and heavy heat-insulating shells emerged from its body, resisting the horrifying high temperature of the lunar corona flame. It penetrated Helios's outer defense like a cannonball. It collided with the aberrated chariot. However, there was no earth-shattering sound. In an instant, the huge whale melted into a pool of surging blood and seeped into Helios through all the holes it could find. It forcibly squeezed into the matrix of Helios. At this moment, the secret instrument from Garland was embedded in the huge Helios. At this moment, the horn of the battle between the two great masters, which was destined to last for a long time, finally sounded. Huaishir, who was still holding his bowl of rice, heard Tangi's sigh. Silly boy, you're 18 this year, right? As if unintentionally, she withdrew her gaze from the distance and asked casually, Huaishir raised his eyebrows and looked over. He was subconsciously a little vigilant. His arranged radar had a reaction. Now that I think about it, it hasn't been easy for me all these years. I've raised you with all my might. I hope you'll be successful in the future. Now, you have a big house of a few hundred square meters, a job, a successful career, and your popularity among your fans is getting higher and higher. Seeing you become more successful day by day, and your life is getting sweeter and sweeter day by day. I'm so happy. I can't stop talking about it. As she said that, she raised her little wings and pretended to wipe the corners of her eyes. But there's only one thing that I can't stop worrying about. Every time I think about it, I feel like a knife is being twisted in my heart. I only hate myself as a useless sister who can't help you. What the hell? Are you going to arrange a blind date for me? Under Huai Shi's vigilant and frightened gaze, she raised her head and suddenly smiled. Do you want to get a good car? Dead silence. Huai Shi was dumbfounded. The rice fell from his mouth. Chapter 855. What? Huai Shi did not understand. The car. Tongji raised her wings and let out a roaring engine sound. That car that can drive on any kind of lousy road. The one that can be used to pick up girls and blow up thieves. She emphasized seriously, look at how cool other people are when they drive. I won't allow other people's children to have things that my contractor doesn't have. Don't. Why do you still need a car? Huai Shi was so scared that he almost lost his grip on his chopsticks. Don't you have a horse? That's not convenient to transport goods. It has a bad temper and has gained so much weight recently. Also, it likes your students more than it likes you. It doesn't even want you to ride it. Tongji wrapped her little wings around his neck and began to murmur like a demon. Think about it. With Helios, won't you be able to go wherever you want? Rob whoever you want? Steal whatever you want? No, no, no. Huai Shi finally caught the rice that had spilled out of his mouth. He wiped his face and shook his head. I have to be that lucky too. Why don't you have that kind of luck? I see that your life is precious beyond words. You're just a lousy car that's one version behind. You're destined to be a virtuous person like you. Tongji egged her on even more. Besides, don't you still have me, your sister? It's because of you that I'm scared. Huai Shi's eyes widened. This lousy car. Even his sisters outside don't have it, but you insist that I have it. I don't think it's anything good. Besides, it's trying to steal from a master. Do you want to die? How could he not know? Previously, he had used too much of a cheat, causing young Master Ming to enter a titled state and unable to use her soul weapon. Now, he only had a high-grade Xiangjuan without any money. Unfortunately, Xiangjuan was a stigmata relic. She could not inherit her biggest advantage, the large amount of source substance. She could only use it for self-defense. After careful calculation, other than Beelzebub, there was only a dog left. What could he use to fight Publius and Garland? Just because his dog's head is hard? Moreover, didn't he say that he would take the opportunity to take some of the reflection crystals back? Why did he suddenly want to take the car back? Are you stupid? There's still a half-finished god above Helios. Just kill that thing, and you'll get as many light crystals as you want. The more he spoke, the more ridiculous it became. He had to be able to King kill it. Don't worry, it's not that difficult. Tongji saw through him at a glance. Aren't you just worried that you can't beat Publius and Garland? They're busy fighting each other now, and it's hard to say what the final outcome will be. Most importantly, there's still a powerful backer to fight for. Who? It? Huai Shi subconsciously looked at silly skeleton beside him. Skeleton was also scratching his head and looking at him. I don't understand why this person is talking to the air. Is this the custom and habit of the modern realm? No, no, no. No matter how he looked at it, he was too lonely. Was this the pitiful guy who fantasized about having a girlfriend in those magazines? How pitiful. Give him 2 more bowls of rice. Silly Skeleton became more sympathetic. Huai Shi couldn't figure out what was going on in Silly Skeleton's empty head at all. He only felt that he was getting more and more confused. Putting aside the fact that Silly Skeleton had some of the power of a grandmaster when he was at his peak, now that he had lost almost all of his memories, he was only left with his instincts. He could only function by convulsing, which was more exciting than drawing cards. No matter how he looked at it, It didn't seem reliable. Tongi rolled her eyes. Who said it was silly, skeleton? Have you forgotten? Helios also has its own rules. Huaishi's movements stiffened for a moment. Only then did he react. Helios himself was not an inanimate object that had no consciousness. To be precise, this sun chariot that originally represented the movement of the sun, although it was already outdated, it was still an authoritative relic that inherited the will of heaven. Even if it didn't have its own will, it still carried out the orders left behind by the gods of the past. It carried out a feudal patrol between the stars once every 70 years. It had a rather flexible and unmanned system that could cope with all kinds of changes, including self-maintenance, forward movement, docking, charging, and internal updates, as well as other aspects of the situation. This included limited cooperation with alchemists, as well as opening part of the internal mysteries to the outside world in exchange for the progress of its own restoration. Just like a rigid AI, it could perfectly execute all preset instructions and even had a part of flexible thinking. But the flaw was that once its own rules were controlled by others, it would fall into a passive state and be unable to react in the face of unexpected situations. That was why alchemists were allowed to exist on the chariot for a long time. Helios provided its own unique resources and even a unique internal environment, and even the mysteries left behind by the gods, in exchange for the service and protection of alchemists. The two sides were essentially in a cooperative relationship, not master and slave. There had always been only one object of loyalty, and that was the long-dead Olympian gods. But now, it was obvious that the rigid AI had been tricked. This time, it was the veteran who had been tricked. How tragic. Huaishi could understand what had happened just by patting his head. It was obvious that a bug in the internal rules had been exploited and it had fallen into a trap. All its belongings had been taken away by Publius and used to build the transformers. But this did not mean that Helios had lost its power. On the contrary, although its body had been destroyed, its power had been strengthened like never before in this secret ritual. It was just that it could not control itself. If it could be used properly, it might be possible to wrestle with the Grandmaster. Even if the success rate was low, it was still better than sitting around and waiting for the friendly forces to attack. Besides, even if it did not succeed, couldn't it give them some trouble? Since they had nothing to do, Huaishi, who would never admit that he had been convinced by Tongi, coughed and put down his bowl. Why don't we give it a try? Let's give it a try. Let's give it a try first. Half an hour later, Huaishi once again picked up the saddlebag and the dog, ready to go. At the door, the skeleton handed over a huge and heavy bottle. Here, water. Thank you, thank you. Huaishi filled the bottle with gratitude. However, he was surprised to see it dragging out another box. When he opened it, it was filled with vacuum-sealed blocks. Ah, I almost forgot, the skeleton said. There are also compressed biscuits? I don't know, but they seem to be food. Here, there's such good stuff. Huaishi's eyes lit up. He opened the bag and began stuffing it. The skeleton next to him was still carrying out all kinds of things. Do you want any leaves? You seem to like tea a lot. By the way, do you want tape? It will be troublesome if the spacesuit breaks. Ah, there's a tent here. Wait a moment. Bring a teapot? Bring a pot too. I don't really need it anyway. Do you want a change of clothes? There's a headlamp here, but the battery is almost gone. Do you want to watch? It seems to be able to tell the time. I haven't figured out how to wind it yet. I don't know if you know how. Bring a pair of binoculars too. This is a rod-shaped object that can vibrate. It seems to be very powerful. Bring it for self-defense. Forget about the last one. Before Huaishi could refuse, his body was covered with gifts from the skeleton. There was a grill in his left hand and a box of old clothes in his right. He was almost unable to walk. Seeing the skeleton stuffing the vibrating object into his trouser pocket, he jumped back a few meters in fright. No, no, no. There's no need for this. The skeleton was puzzled. He didn't quite understand why Huaishi was so afraid of this thing. After scratching his head, he was about to recommend some more skeleton department stores when he saw Huaishi take a few steps back. He pulled the dog that he was particularly reluctant to part with and said goodbye. It's getting late. I'll leave first. Oh, goodbye. The skeleton was stunned for a moment and waved to see him off. "Have a safe journey, brother. And you should go back soon, too." Huaishir took 2 steps and waved goodbye again. He turned and walked into the depths of the darkness. But as he walked, he couldn't help but look back. He saw that in the light behind the broken crack, half of the skeleton was still sitting in the same place, waving at his back. There was no expression in the empty eye sockets, but it made people feel that it was full of blessings and expectations. It made people feel even more guilty. It was difficult to walk. Huaishir withdrew his gaze with difficulty and took a few steps forward. In the end, he stopped and sighed in frustration. He turned back and looked behind him. He scratched his head. He asked tentatively, "Why don't we go together?" In the silence, the skeleton was stunned for a moment. Immediately, half of the body jumped up from the ground, raised its arms, and grinned in joy. "Yay!" Huaishir couldn't help but cover his face. It was such a dangerous thing. You should have hesitated for a moment. But on second thought, Helios was such a ghost. It might not be safer to let it stay here than to stay by his side. Although it was definitely not safe to stay by his side. Just like that, according to the surveillance footage of Helios after the incident, at 1:15 p.m., the broken 3-wheeled car carrying 2 people, a dog, and a little white mouse started to move. It creaked into the depths of the steel maze. At the same time, Hades stood in the hall that was filled with tragic blood. With an expressionless face, he handed a photo to the darkness. The photo disappeared into the darkness. Immediately, a hoarse voice sounded, "Who is this?" Hades replied indifferently, "The gold medal fighter of the Astronomy Club, the successor of the Ivory Tower, the king of Donbua, Huaishir. I seem to have heard of it in hell." The existence in the darkness glanced at the photo in front of him suspiciously. Looking at the smiling face on it, he couldn't help but frown. Is it a man or a woman? Male. He looks quite young. Yes, 18. Hades lowered his eyes and sighed with admiration. Young and promising. "It's shameful." The thing in the darkness snorted. "How should we deal with him?" he asked. "Find him, kill him, and chop off his head." Before Hades finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and cautiously emphasized, "No, you should personally chop him into meat paste, destroy the sacred mark, and then use the gray poison to contaminate all of his source substances. Remember, don't give him any chance to jump off a cliff, escape, fake death, or resurrect." "So cautious?" The blood-seeking hound revealed a sinister smile. "This is the first time I've seen you so cautious." "And your answer?" Hades asked coldly. "I will, just as you wish." The darkness swirled and disappeared without a trace. Only the scattered ashes gathered on the ground, forming a line of blurry footprints that disappeared into the distance. The person wearing the crown disappeared without a trace. Chapter 856. In the middle of Helios, under layers of arcane seals, flames were burning in the narrow camp. The alchemists were expressionless around the bonfire, quietly staring at the flickering light. In the thicker and thicker darkness, this was the only comfort, the only beacon in countless nightmares. But in the darkness beyond the firelight, footsteps suddenly sounded, like the cold rain beating against the window on a cold night. It was so low, so clear, and with a chill that made one feel uneasy, it gradually approached. The people in front of the bonfire raised their eyes, and their expressions became gloomy. They pulled out their weapons and aimed at the direction of the footsteps. They saw a little light flickering in the darkness. It gradually approached, and the outline gradually became clear. The appearance of a young man was revealed, smiling at them, waving his hand, and a wisp of smoke rose from the cigar at the corner of his mouth. A familiar smell drifted over. At that moment, there was a faint sound of relief. Only one person was still holding a knife. "Izzy, you're late." "Ahaha. Sorry, I met an old acquaintance on the way, so I stayed and chatted for a while. I accidentally forgot the time." Izzy patted her head, looked at their expressions, and became more and more happy. "You all look good. Congratulations." His footsteps stopped outside the boundary of the arcane seals, and he did not go any closer. He just smiled and looked at those familiar faces. The old Egyptian lady Yima, the master of metal of the Russian Federation, Valerie, and finally, the trembling Rachel. Izzy asked curiously, "Where's Huaishur?" Rachel's expression twisted, and he said coldly, "He's dead. Is that so? What a pity." He shrugged regretfully and looked at Rachel meaningfully. "Then how did you escape?" For a moment, Rachel's expression changed, as if he was trying hard to restrain his anger and resentment. His lips moved, but he finally withdrew his gaze. "It has nothing to do with you." He hid his slightly deformed body behind his robe, avoiding Izzy's scrutinizing gaze. Izzy withdrew her gaze and smiled. "So, did you get anything?" No one responded. Returned empty-handed, he sighed sympathetically and stepped aside, happily showing the formation behind him in the dark. "But I'm different. I brought Galandian back." There was a sudden silence. Everyone raised their heads in shock. In the darkness, the leader of the alchemists lifted his helmet, revealing his aged face. "The exploration base is ready." The old man, who was as cold as stone, said faintly, "Please follow me." In an instant, everyone's expression changed. Wait a minute." Rachel was in disbelief. Grandmaster, how probably because he was worried, so he followed us from the beginning." Izzy shrugged and smoked a cigarette. To be honest, even I was shocked." "How is it? Are you surprised?" "Are you surprised?" Rachel's expression twitched, and it was hard for him to say what was on his mind. He saw with his own eyes that Garland had been beheaded by Publius. But gradually, that twitching expression quickly twisted, and his muscles wriggled as if it had turned into another face. A cold will entered his body, causing him to raise his head and smile at the friend he had not seen in a long time. But there was no warmth in that smile. It was so cold. It was full of mockery. "Didn't you look down on those 1,000-layer cakes the most, Garland?" Publius laughed strangely from a distance. "When did you start to study biology? A small trick that can only be used to prolong your feeble existence." "I'm different from you, Publius. We've never been the same." Garland's reply was even colder. "Apart from the spirit, blood, and bones, how many copies of yourself can you split into? You'll only decay in vain." The cane struck the floor, and a sharp sound burst forth. The link from afar was cut off. "No, we're all the same. From the beginning." In the final moments, the cold smile on Rachel's face gradually disappeared, and only a vague whisper came from his convulsing throat. "This is all part of fate." In the dead silence, he finally lay on the ground, gasping for breath with difficulty. Tears and snot were already streaming down his face. The alchemy array that had been inscribed on the back of his deformed body quietly dissipated, leaving only ugly scars that looked like burns. "I don't know. I didn't say anything," he cried out in defense. "I'm innocent, great grandmaster, believe me." "I know." Garland did not care. "Get up, Rachel. There's still something I can use you for." Rachel was stunned for a moment, and then he was overjoyed. A grateful smile appeared on his tear-streaked face, and he nodded vigorously. "Great grandmaster, I need an explanation." In the silence, Valerie said, "What's all this about?" "It's unexpected," Garland said, "but my promise still stands." He raised his eyes and stared at the alchemists who had gathered around the fire according to his instructions. "But I need all of you to play a role." Following his words, wisps of blood seeped out from the ceiling. They extended, spread, and pulled into lines. Thousands of strands turned into rain. Red rain. In an instant, it covered the entire world. Priestess Yima's eyes moved slightly, and she looked up in disbelief. Countless wisps of blood gathered and overlapped, turning into a crimson curtain under their feet. From within it, countless vast and mighty phantoms appeared, and they vanished in a fleeting manner, transforming into countless mirages of mirages. A terrifying loud noise suddenly burst out. The blood that seeped out finally broke through the defenses and burst out with a roar, turning into a red sea. In an instant, they were engulfed in it. The whole of Helios was shaking violently. The transmission of light signals was so slow. 5 seconds later, under the observation of the self-discovery mirror, the horrifying situation of the ferocious chariot that was hovering above the eye of Jupiter was seen. The sea of blood that the son of Leviathan had dissolved into was rising, gushing out from every crack. It spread, permeated, quickly contracted, and spread again. It formed a hard and huge crystal cluster, moving rapidly. Countless sharp horns opened up like petals, collided, closed, reversed, and expanded their volume in an extremely illogical manner. A faint glow flowed out from it, illuminating countless unfamiliar mountains and rivers. They gathered together and took root on Helios's body like a lotus. Then, countless watercolors appeared out of thin air. In the ocean-like blue, the edges of coral and the shadow of a huge fish appeared. Those were the elements of destruction that had died long ago, the remains of the old Gaia that represented the past history. Forbidden mystic instrument, seed of Gaia. Just like that, it was forcefully inserted into Helios's system. At this moment, the attack from Garland began. A loud roar sounded, and countless dust fell from the ceiling. The skeleton on the three-wheeled motorcycle was startled. It subconsciously pulled out the vibrating rod-like object and waved it around. It almost poked Huaishur. "Be careful. Can't you change to something else?" The corner of Huaishur's eyes twitched, and he snatched the object. Then, he rummaged through the skeleton's collection for a long time and found a pan and stuffed it into his hand. "Big brother, use this. This is a blunt weapon, and it's very powerful." "Is that so?" The skeleton scratched his head as if he understood. Then, he pinned the pan on his ribs. Huaishur was speechless. They had been moving forward in the gloomy basement of Helios for a long time, under the command of Tangi. "In front. Take a detour in front," the skeleton suddenly reminded. In his eye sockets, Fishball's tail twitched nervously. Then, he quickly raised half of his tail and pointed in another direction. But there was only one way forward, and there was no other way to go. Huaishur hesitated for a moment and scratched his head. He decided to trust Fishball's judgment. Logically speaking, this kind of experimental lab rat should not be able to adapt to the outside environment at all. He did not know how the skeleton was raised, but he was still alive and kicking, and he was frighteningly sensitive to abnormal conditions. Along the way, Huaishur had seen many times, and they had avoided many dangers. Sometimes, it was a patrolling descending spirit. Sometimes it was a monster that had escaped from the workshop after losing control. And sometimes, it was simply other alchemists who had completely solidified into mutants. Sometimes, Huaishur simply could not see anything. Only the belated premonition of death constantly reminded him not to make the wrong choice. Thanks to its radar, they had not triggered a single battle even though they had been walking in Helios for so long in such a large tricycle. Although the detour was at least 7 or 8 times longer, safety first. We haven't seen anything after walking for so long. Huaishur scratched his head. "Tangi, are your directions reliable? I feel more and more panicked." What they saw along the way was simply a miserable state of an abandoned building. It was unknown how many years it had not been maintained. Even the lights on the wall were still stuck in the gas era. "It's just ahead, not far." Tangi withdrew her gaze and calmly said, "Even if there are changes in the back, the basic skeleton and internal structure of Helios cannot be changed unless it wants to fall apart. Otherwise, the cambium, outflow, creation, and active layers must be kept in balance. In order to maintain balance, the replacement of the abandoned furnace core structure can only sink and be thrown into the debris pile." Huaishur suddenly understood. "In other words, we have to use the abandoned furnace core to restart the engine? How is that possible?" Tangi was amused. "If it were me, before I wanted to do anything, I would first destroy all the backup things and take control of the key in my own hands. Publius has been brewing for so many years, it's impossible that he didn't think of this. Isn't that a garbage dump?" Huaishur asked. "Why are we picking up garbage?" "Silly boy." Tangi was helpless and said earnestly, "Can't you at least use your skills as an illegal organization? Think about it. Garbage is useless, but what about the garbage box itself? Even if the furnace core and the like are definitely scrapped, there's no way to destroy the interface. It was just like the blood vessels of a human body. They were the pathways hidden in every inch of Helios' physical body, the hidden branches of the matrix that were closest to the engine. Then how do you know? Huaishir keenly noticed that something was wrong. In the silence, Tangi's expression gradually became more innocent. She looked into the distance. Then she whistled. Huaishir was about to ask when he saw something strange from the corner of his eye. He slowly turned his head. Outside the narrow window beside him, amidst Tangi's whistle, a silvery white color was slowly rising through the long and narrow window. They could see the solemn silhouette that was gradually emerging outside Helios. It was an illusory moon. At this moment, a waning moon was hanging high in the space outside Helios, shining above the eye of Jupiter. Was whistling so powerful? When Huaishir turned his head to look at Tangi, he heard her sigh helplessly. That has nothing to do with me. That's Publius, okay? At this moment, along with the appearance of the moon, the flames of the sun chariot suddenly rose. When the waning moon appeared beside the chariot that represented the sun, the incredible sun and moon formed a huge secret ritual that could change the world. As the light of the sun and moon mixed with each other, a boundless power burst forth from it. It was using Garland's seed of Gaia in reverse. It followed the miracle passed down from the oldest geocentric theory. It operated brilliantly above Helios, turning into an inextinguishable forging fire. Shockingly huge fluctuations appeared above Huaishir's head, separated by countless layers of thick walls and planks. With Helios as the battlefield, the two grandmasters who stood at the peak of the entire realm began to fight. The disasters and miracles of the abyss constantly changed. Even though it was just a slight shockwave, the heat generated by it was enough to burn the entire exterior of the chariot red. Everything was gradually being placed into the furnace. Extraction. On the little three-wheeled motorcycle, some of the border relics that were slightly inferior in terms of craftsmanship actually cracked, the origin substance within silently dissipating, and was quickly pulled by an invisible force into the whirlpool. Even the silent young master of fate was stirred up, sending bursts of burning illusory heat to Huaishir. If he did not hurry, he was afraid that he would be burned to ashes as a leftover material. Huaishir did not have time to hesitate, swinging the hatred water and switching it to bloodsaw mode, following the guidance of Fishball's tail, cutting through the thick wall. Behind the collapsed iron wall, the air that had been silent for countless years surged, filled with the smell of decay. Ashes flew everywhere. An even deeper darkness was right in front of them. What do we do next? Huaishir poked his head out of the hole, looking at the intricate path inside. I don't know. Tangi helplessly flapped her wings. It's already difficult to calculate the approximate location based on the structure of the outer layer. More detailed things are too difficult. She paused for a moment, looking at Huaishir's side. But isn't there a local who is more familiar with the situation here? Huaishir followed her gaze, looking at the skeleton with the same silly look, and finally saw the trembling white mouse in its eye sockets. On Huaishir's shoulder, the phantom of the crow flashed. Can you please lead the way? She smiled and said softly, I'm in a hurry. Her tone was very gentle. The white mouse whimpered and shrank into a ball in the skeleton's eye sockets, as if it wanted to play dead, but its skull was only so big, and there was no way to hide. Soon it gave up struggling. Trembling, it crawled out, raised its tail, and pointed in a direction towards the right. Then it timidly looked back, extremely uneasy, as if it was afraid that Huaishir would eat it. Tangi helplessly shook her head slightly. Do you need me to explain to you the difference between lead the way and show the way? Squeak! The white mouse screamed in horror again and crawled in the tunnel on all fours. Its speed was very fast, and when it reached a fork in the road, it anxiously wagged its tail at them. It wanted to find a flagpole and skin itself and hang it on it. It was afraid that it was not attentive enough. Sir, this way. That's right. Tangi nodded with relief, then looked back and urged in a brisk tone, What are you waiting for? Let's go, let's go. No, this mouse was so psychic. It could even see Tangi Huaisher did not have time to ask again. After confirming the equipment on his body, he helped the skeleton hide the little three-wheeled motorcycle and walked in. At the back, the friendly puppy stopped in front of the crack for a long time. It lowered its head and sniffed the air around it. It looked into the distance in confusion, as if it smelled something, but it could not smell it clearly. But soon, under Huaisher's call, it turned around and walked into the darkness. After a long, long time, in the silence, the light of the entire corridor dimmed again. An invisible shadow quietly approached. As if it was chasing something, a line of pale footprints formed by ashes disappeared in it. Only faint laughter echoed in the air. Chapter 857. The world seemed to be spinning. No, it was the darkness that was swirling. In the deepest part of Helios, the invisible space was also constantly inverted and cycled under the secret ritual of the two grandmasters, forming one invisible vortex after another. Sometimes Huaisher would find himself walking on the ceiling in a daze, and sometimes he would find that it was just his imagination. In the silence, apart from the squeaking of the mice, there was only the rumbling of the small handcart under the skeleton's butt. He once suspected that he was lost in a dizzying maze. The further he went, the more silent the origin substances became. They contained the aura of the abyss, making people feel vaguely uneasy. What's in front? In a vast outer space, the price of land is high. Every inch of space has to be put into the scope of effective use. Where else could there be next to the garbage dump? Tanguy said slowly, the cemetery. Helios's cemetery. All the dead alchemists were buried here. To be precise, it's a group of alchemists who were more ambitious than capable and whose ideals surpassed reality. Tanguy shrugged regretfully. In short, it's the group of alchemists who didn't amount to much. Unfortunately, reality was so cruel. In the precious territory of Helios, there was no place for the incompetent to live. Even when they died, they didn't receive the treatment of a grand burial. They were too safe and too ordinary. Their skills were unable to fulfill their ambitions, nor were they able to cause enough damage. They couldn't create miracles, nor could they turn into disasters. For many alchemists, even if they died, the disasters accumulated in their bodies were enough to turn their corpses into strange relics or even mutate into abyssal species. For example, once a grandmaster died, the disasters or miracles condensed by the secret ritual of his life would be gathered into a solemn and terrifying object. And for some people, when they died, they died. They could only be burned to ashes. Because they had once worked for Helios, they were put into a small box, found a place where they wouldn't be an eyesore, and threw away. They didn't expect them to have any residual value in the end. In a sense, this graveyard had become an incomparable mockery. All of the powerless individuals who had died had gathered together to keep each other warm. The remnants of origin substance continued to speak of their past fantasies, but they couldn't even form a ghost, leaving only the substance of shame, preserved for eternity. Since there's no way to go any further, why not return to the present? Huaisher asked, puzzled. Do you really think Helios is a bus? Do you think you can go up and down as you please? Tanguy sneered. Indeed, in order to maintain the miracle of Helios to the greatest extent, to avoid the leakage of technology and people with ulterior motives, Helios will only return to the present realm once every 70 years. But the alchemists who monopolized all this still felt that it was not enough. They wanted a longer monopoly and greater benefits. Just look at the rotten state of the Stone Cauldron Institute. From the first person who sought personal gain until now, the rules have become stricter and stricter. Now it's completely different from the beginning. Those alchemists who came from the present realm can only stay for one cycle at most before being expelled. And those who were born in Helios can never leave. These laws are engraved in every soul and can't be violated at all. For the alchemists buried here, they were born in this miraculous prison. The funny thing was that some people wanted to come back even in their dreams after leaving. In silence, they passed through the final tunnel. Everything in front of them suddenly became clear, even though it was still dark. But under the illumination of the skull's headlamp, it was enough for Huaishur to peek into the distance. In this vast and deathly silent space, it was as if they had come to a farm, but there were no crops on the flat steel ground. There were only low cross-shaped tombstones one after another, maintaining an absolutely precise distance and gap. They sat on the ground like dead seedlings, spreading to the end of their line of sight. Right above their heads, a huge building was suspended high up in the air, vaguely revealing its own silhouette. It was the furnace core that had long been abandoned. But now, even the abandoned furnace core was full of cracks like a broken heart. It broke from the middle, and the lower half of the heart fell to the ground, leaving a tragic scar. But in the abandoned furnace core that fell to the ground, there was a faint light. It was like someone had lit a fire in the ruins of a collapsed tower. There were traces of human life. Huaishur subconsciously clenched the hateful water, turned around, and looked at the skull, who was also stunned. The skull scratched its head. "I haven't been here before. Is there someone here?" Huaishur did not answer. Who could tell if it was a human or a ghost? He had already met a silly skull that picked him up and brought him back to his nest. He could not expect his luck to be so good that he would meet another thing that was not hostile to him at all. "This is that thing, right? That thing." The skull pulled out the frying pan from between its ribs and waved it twice excitedly. "The blood-boiling battle time is coming." No, wait first, wait, okay?" Huaishur's expression twitched. "Why are you so brave?" Huaishur finally pressed down the skull and the dog together. He raised the hateful water and lightened his steps, intending to touch it first to understand. However, just as he took 2 steps, he heard a rumbling sound behind him. When he turned around, he saw the innocent-looking skull on the handcart. They looked at each other. In the silence, Huaishur had the urge to pull his hair again. "I'm the gold medal fighter of the Astronomy Club, a group of backstabbers, and the Ivory Tower's ambush overlord. Why am I not professional at all when I meet a group of silly teammates like you?" Soon, Huaishur found an alternative. He took a piece of tape and simply tied its big rotor to the dog's back. The class change was completed in an instant. Skeleton Soldier, LVUP, Skeleton Cavalry. Problem solved. It was just a sneaky lurker followed by a sneaky skeleton riding a dog. No matter how you looked at it, there was something wrong. But they couldn't care less. They had already seized the time and lurked next to the fallen furnace core. Inside the abandoned furnace core, an illusory light was coming from the empty cavity that was already full of cracks. Huaishur carefully approached, held his breath, poked his head out, and looked inside from outside the crack. Soon, a dog's head carrying a skeleton appeared beside him. It clung to the wall and slowly rose up to look inside. It was full of curiosity. "Oh my God!" The skeleton couldn't help but sigh in a low voice. So miserable. Huaishur couldn't help but turn around and glare at him. He raised his finger and made a shushing gesture. The skeleton was at a loss and didn't know what he meant. However, the people inside didn't notice their arrival. Under the dim candlelight, it was a simple display like a beggar in the slums. There wasn't even a table. Countless messy books were thrown casually on the ground. The unkempt old man knelt among them, muttering something in a hoarse voice as if he was praying. It was more like he was cursing. The stench assailed their nostrils. No one knew whether it was the smell of feces, dirt, or decay, but he was still oblivious to it. He was still writing and drawing on the paper, but the pen in his hand had long been broken and there was no ink. The scattered paper around him didn't record any exquisite technology or the essence of alchemy. There was only messy graffiti, and it was impossible to distinguish the content of the graffiti. Huaishur dared to bet that even the thing he drew with his toe was 100 times closer to the truth than this. But he didn't dare to show his face at all. The most afraid people in the world were Taoists, monks, old people, and children. But even in hell, they were afraid of these things in hell. 8 out of 10 people dressed as religious people were tainted with depraved divinity. They were more than a little more powerful than other monsters. As for the old men and children who were alive and kicking in hell, it was even more terrifying. Any one of them could make 10 horror movies. After taking a deep breath quietly, Huaishir became more cautious. He listened attentively to the messy words in the wind. Amidst the countless curses and hoarse, unknown words, there were vague sentences that were repeated over and over again, never stopping. That bastard. Bastard. Those lunatics. They're all crazy. They're all crazy. They've long been abnormal. Hades. Hades, the crazy figure wrote and cursed in vain. Sometimes it laughed sharply, and sometimes it roared hoarsely. It's too late. We've all made a big mistake. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have presided over the mystery of fate for that bastard. What did I do? What did I? No, it's not my fault. They deserve it. I also deserve it. We all have to pay the price. This is the consequence of violating the law. Violating the Pied Piper. No, violating Helios. He laughed vaguely and suddenly choked with sobs, as if tears were streaming down his face. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Why did I let it be born back then? I should have strangled Garland, that damn freak, to death in his infancy. At that moment, Huaishir felt as if he had been struck by lightning. It was not because of the hidden meaning in the words, but because the crazy old man suddenly turned his head. His empty eye sockets were scorched, full of blood, and slid down. He looked at Huaishir. Tears. Please, he said, please mourn for me. Thunder burst forth. At that moment, the water of hatred in Huaishir's hand burst forth with a loud noise. It tore through the air and broke into the narrow space from the outside. Surrounded by lightning and blood, it smashed toward the old man. But the change was faster than him. The moment he broke into the crack, the dim light went out silently. Everything disappeared without a trace. It was just an illusion. Huaishir's movements paused. When he slowly lowered his head, he saw countless pieces of paper flying in the stirring air, and the source of the stench, in the corner, there was the rotting corpse of the old man. He had died a long time ago. He still held the broken pen in his hand. Under the light of the skull's headlamp, the last handwriting he left behind was revealed on the floor. The name he wrote was full of hatred. It was better to say that it was a futile curse that would not work at all. Garland? Huaishir was silent for a long time, in disbelief. It was not just because he had just heard the name of the element of destruction, the Pied Piper. It was because of the name in front of him. Before he died, the old man did not resent Hubris for what he had done. Instead, he resented Garland. What was even more unbelievable was that the Grandmaster Garland was actually born in Helios. Chapter 858. What's going on? Huaishir looked at Tangi. An illusion? If you want to describe it, it's better to say that it's the existence of an obsession. Tangi glanced at the corpse on the ground with pity. The remnant of regret, just like the stigmata relic in your hand. There's nothing you can do about it. When it's irreversible, you can only regret it in vain. With resentment in your heart, you can't get rid of it, but you don't even know who you should hate. She said, it's really pitiful. Bang! The hateful water in Huaishir's hand hummed. It seemed to be angry, and a bolt of lightning shot out. But under Tangi's gaze, it couldn't be rash. It soon dissipated, leaving only a silent humming, like a sad sigh. The old man's resentment toward the piper in his obsession cast a shadow over Huaishir's heart. However, what he cared about even more was the information he had revealed. The Grand Master Garland was born on Helios, but according to Huaishir's understanding, he was clearly a member of the pure-blood family, the Hermann family, who had inherited the holy name of the Blessed One. Could he have been born on Helios by the alchemist of the Hermann family? Regardless of whether this was possible or not, would the Hermann family allow their descendants to be bound by Helios? If it was true, then there was even more of a problem. Everyone born on Helios was limited by the laws in their souls. How did he leave Helios? If Huaishir remembered correctly, Garland became a Grand Master in the present realm 120 years ago. He didn't hide his strength to this extent. It's just the ravings of a madman. It might not be true, Tangi said. Besides, if Publius could escape from the prison of the Astronomical Association, why couldn't Garland do it? This was even more strange. When Huaishir thought about it carefully, he noticed a problem that had been overlooked. Publius' death was confirmed before they left the moon. And what happened on Helios proved that the news of his death was nothing more than a distraction set up by Publius. The return of Helios to the present was a 70-year cycle. In other words, Publius had been on the sun chariot since at least 70 years ago. No matter how many schemes he had, no matter how shady his intentions were, he had plenty of time. Moreover, he was a grandmaster. He finally found the Hua point. Huaishur suddenly asked, if he wants to make a move, he doesn't have to pick a time. He could just hold the ceremony when Helios is the furthest away from the present realm. Why go to Jupiter's orbit? Of course, it's because this is also one of the requirements of the secret instrument. Tangi laughed strangely. Gods are the products and pillars of the present realm. They can't be established in places that are too far away from the present realm. You know, the kind of people who cross the border to give birth, right? Children born in Myanmar don't have Dongxia household registration. Moreover, the actual requirements were more complicated than relying on having children to obtain citizenship. It had to be in the present realm, and the closer it was, the better. Otherwise, the conditions for the birth of a god would not be established. But it couldn't be too close, or the three seals would instantly obliterate it. At the same time, it had to be close to hell, or it would lack the necessary conditions for divinity sublimation. But it couldn't enter hell, or it would be like delivering food to the rancher's door. After all kinds of considerations and sifting through countless options, there was only one last choice left: Jupiter's orbit. It was within the solar system projected by the present realm, but it was also independent, as if it was stepping on the border of a country. Even the fastest response of the Astronomical Society would take at least 15 minutes to get there. But we still can't rule out accidents. Huaishur said, although Helios was scrapped, the system still sent out an invitation, and Garland came here because of it. Tangi shook her head helplessly. How can there be anything in the world that can wait until you are 100% sure? 30% was enough to give a try, 50% was enough to boost one's confidence, and 80% was already a dream come true for them. Moreover, how can there be no risk at all in creating a god? Tangi couldn't hide her mockery. Whether it succeeds or fails, it is his destiny. What do you mean? I'm afraid this is the most tragic part of the gods, Huaishur. She said meaningfully, mortals can resist fate, but have you ever heard a color TV or an air conditioner or refrigerator say to you, my life is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens? Everything was destined. Everything was part of fate. For the gods, this was the case for everything. Long before the destiny sublimated from divinity was born, there was no room for choice. The closer they got, the deeper they went, and the more they understood the essence of it, the more they could feel their own powerlessness and the destined sad ending. Whether it was the gods who had fallen, Helios, the god of the unborn, or even Publius and Garland, the closer they were to a miracle, the easier it was to be swallowed up by disaster. The closer they were to destiny, the more they could understand the cruelty and horror. Publius couldn't stop it. The existence of the gods was too big. Just their birth would cause chaos in the cultivation system and the degree of distortion. It was like an iron ball suddenly appearing on a spider's web, and it was bound to cause a stir in the whole realm. The wind rose at the end of the green duckweed. Before the butterflies in South America flapped their wings, there were already signs of a storm. At this moment, in this cold and vast sky, relics abandoned by time, war chariots abandoned by the present world, monsters abandoned by hell, gods abandoned by history, explorers abandoned by reinforcements in this sealed furnace. Everyone was like materials thrown into the cauldron, bound by their own destiny, mission, and destiny. They had no choice but to move forward. Everyone who was attracted here had a reason, and everyone who came here was indispensable. This might be the real secret. Forging the fire of gods was always destiny. Huaishur finally understood. After a long silence, he couldn't help but frown and exclaim in astonishment, with so many messy things in the cauldron, can the food be delicious? One mouthful of Helios, two of the main ingredients, several alchemists sprinkled into the Pied Piper's conspiracy, simmered over a small fire, and added in the precipitation of hell, miracle, and disaster. Simmered over a large fire. Then added one gold medal fighter of the Astronomy Society, one prince of the paradise, one little page of the Huai Road, one disaster musician, one legendary investigator, and one king of Dambwa. I'm not afraid that your cauldron is too small to hold it all. You'd rather boil water and cabbage here. Don't you think it's a waste? What kind of mess was this? Huaishir couldn't understand it all. It could only be said that this was a great master. So what do we do now? In the distance, in the earth-shaking roar, Huaishir scratched his head and looked up at the empty surroundings. You don't have to do anything. Tangi said, just sit down. At that moment, in front of Huaishir, a magnificent light and shadow appeared. In the bright god's wedge, a figure that didn't exist here was reflected. The solemn and cold posture reappeared again. It illuminated Huaishir's pupils. It had been a long time. She looked around, sized up, and glanced at Huaishir with a faint smile. Then, the white mouse in the skeleton's eye sockets trembled even more. But when she stretched out her hand, it still didn't dare to disobey her will. It carefully jumped on her hand and curled into a ball. Then, she pinched its tail and spun it around like a bouncy ball. It could only whimper and beg for mercy, not daring to resist. Finally, Tangi turned around and stretched out her hand again. Give me Lord of the Flies. Then, Beelzebub, who was pretending to be dead in Huaishir's satchel, also trembled. Huaishir didn't suspect anything else. He took out Beelzebub from the saddlebag, swung his hand, and turned the pistol back into the book of steel. Do you need anything else? He asked. Tangi smiled, tilted her head, and asked, Do I need a contractor's hug? Huaishir couldn't help but roll his eyes. But seeing him unconsciously become a little nervous, the corner of Tongji's mouth curled up into a happy arc. Then, stand here and don't move. I'll steal an orange plantation for you. She tossed Lord of the Flies in her hand and looked back with a bright smile. Her drifting figure suddenly shrank, turned into an invisible stream of light, and rose into the furnace core in the ceiling. She only left behind some meaningful words. Get along well with your new friend. Don't worry, don't worry. Huaishir waved his hand indifferently and said goodbye. Until now, the skeleton finally reacted. Dumbfounded, it pointed in the direction where Tangi disappeared. Oh my God, is that a ghost? Aren't you a ghost too? Huaishir shook his head, too speechless to complain. He shook his head, lifted his foot, and pushed the corpse aside. After putting down the hateful water, he started a fire and found a comfortable place to sit down. He let out a long breath, bathed in the warm firelight. Finally, he relaxed. From time to time, the skeleton looked up at the half of the furnace core hanging above his head, worried about whether his friend was doing well there. In the rising firelight, Huaishir yawned. He felt a wave of sleepiness. After a long time, the light danced, illuminating the shadow behind him, causing the shadow to constantly twist and sway, as if it was gradually expanding. Quickly, it occupied the entire wall. Something huge was quickly rising to the surface, like a shark that had suddenly leapt out after a long period of silence. In an instant, it broke through the darkness, cutting off the hate water that was close at hand, and its ferocious mouth closed in on Huaishir. At that moment, Huaishir sighed. Why was he so unable to keep his cool? He raised his eyes. Intense light burst out. Suddenly, a roar burst out from his fingertips on the ground. There was no need to prepare. The Supreme called Symphony instantly arrived here. It did not attack, did not defend, and did not escape. Just, it plucked an invisible string. Then, everything seemed to be frozen in place. At this moment, under the knock of the Supreme, Huaishir poured all his strength into his fingertips and played the first note after the silence, even faster than the loud sound. Then, the half of the furnace core that fell trembled violently. The steel rang, just like the resonating cavity on the body of the zither under the waves of the Supreme, burst out more than 10 times the echo, and the terrifying low tremor instantly broke through the furnace core, gushing out in all directions. Spreading. Wherever it passed, the dust on the steel ground danced, and countless tombstones suddenly shook, bursting out a high-pitched sound, buzzing. It was like the roar of a dead soul, resounding in the darkness. At this moment, in this abandoned cemetery, the scrapped half of the furnace core had turned into Huaishi's resonance box, and the countless tombstones were like Huaishi's most loyal tuning forks. As soon as he stepped into this area, the attacker had already walked onto the stage that was most suitable for a calamity musician in the whole of Helios. The moment a drop of water fell into the ocean, it set off ripples that rushed in all directions. In an instant, Huaishi's plucking with all his strength swept across the entire cemetery, and under the resonance and vibration of countless tuning forks, it shrank back again. So, the world was silent, and there was no sound left, and the vibration that was magnified hundreds of times had been applied to the abandoned furnace core, turning into an earth-shattering roar that filled every inch of space, every inch of air, and reverberated violently, turning all the paper, graffiti, and even broken corpses into dust. In an instant, the huge force that spread and contracted burst out the grand roar of the grand symphony void. It was clearly enough to tear all eardrums, but human ears could no longer hear it. Only the squirming shadows were shaking rapidly, wrapped in the terrible roar. Every reverberation of the vibration was comparable to the terrible impact at the center of the explosion, erupting continuously from the shadows of nothingness. But without waiting for the aftermath to subside, Huaishi's face was expressionless as she pressed down again. So under the push of his fingertips, the contracted vibration once again burst out in all directions, wrapping around the furnace core and countless tombstones. It tore through the air, setting off a violent hurricane that swept through the entire cemetery. Terrifying waves rushed into each other and contracted again. This tyrannical power was stuffed into the shadows that pounced out, triggering a second round of explosions. The furnace core wailed, and countless cracks appeared. But Huaishi's movements did not pause at all, and without mercy, he pressed the last finger. The entire cemetery shook at this moment, and the steel ground was full of cracks. Unparalleled power surged, flowing from the material, from the waterfall into thousands of tributaries, and once again converging into an ocean under the accompaniment of the symphony. It completely swallowed up the solidified person in the shadow. The broken shadow flew in all directions, and a twisted and strange figure spewed out a stinky blood mist under the ravages of the symphony. It was forcibly squeezed into the iron wall of the furnace core, smashed through the steel, and flew backward, in a trance and dizziness of consciousness. It was unbelievable. What was that? Of course it's fate, my friend. Huaishi's whisper came into his ears. That mocking face was already close, and then the dancing blood turned into a torrent, bursting with electric light, illuminating his eyes. He saw Huaishi smile. It was so ferocious. Fate was knocking on the door. Chapter 859. The prelude to the Fifth Symphony was unveiled. At the beginning of the symphony, there was no fourth note of fate. The power that burst out with each superposition increased exponentially. With Huaishi's attainments in resonance, he was still unable to grasp the recoil of the fourth note. But 3 knocks on the gate of fate were enough to severely injure the attacker, hidden in the shadows. Using himself as a fulcrum, he resonated with the surroundings. The power that was raised had exceeded the limit of Huaishi's control. It was as if the entire cemetery had become a giant that suddenly jumped up and held him down, punched him twice, and then jumped into the air to trample him with gravity. If it was a body of flesh and blood, it would have been blown up in an instant. Now, in the dispersing shadows, a battered figure with wounds all over and blood dripping from his body fell. Without waiting for him to land, the hate water roared. Huaishi's blood gathered on the hate water, turning into overlapping vortexes. When they rubbed against each other, a high-pitched and ear-piercing sound burst out, forming a wheel-like chainsaw. In an instant, the plow fell. The attacker didn't have time to scream before he was cut in half at the waist. But after falling to the ground, the broken corpse didn't roll. Instead, it burst like a bubble, dissipating into dissipating shadows and disappearing without a trace. Dead? No, it was a bait. And in the darkness, a dim shadow had turned into a torrent, silently swallowing Huaishi's shadow. A strange figure rose out of thin air. Seizing the short gap when Huaishi's attack was exhausted, 6 arms swung, and pitch-black blades had already chopped down like a rainstorm, blocking every inch of space for Huaishi to dodge. Sparks burst out. The sound of steel colliding was endless. Indeed, using bait to deceive Huaishi to attack and seize his gap to launch a surprise attack was a wonderful hunting plan. Unfortunately, Huaishi didn't have such a thing as a gap at the moment. It was as if he had eyes on the back of his head. The living blood surged, and the hate water reversed. It actually divided into 6 beats at this critical moment, deflecting and blocking the 6 insidious blades one by one. This was the circulation of power. As long as it was within the domain, mastery was not something that could be reasoned with. After harmonizing his muscles, pulse, and heartbeat, Huaishi's body had become a perfect fighting tool. He could guide and change the direction of force at will. There was no blind spot where one could not exert force, nor was there any gap or loss of power to withdraw. As long as it was within the limits of the beat frequency, it could be easily changed. Moreover, the opponent's moves were not untraceable, the Theravada esoteric saber technique. Huaishi was too familiar with this. As if it had not expected such a scene, the dancing shadow froze for a moment. But in the distance, a pair of bone-white footprints appeared. The dim silhouette disappeared in a flash. Raising his hand, he blocked the attack with the puppet and aimed at Huaishi and pulled the trigger. In its hand, the plastic weapon that looked like a toy pistol made a crisp sound. Bang! As a wisp of green smoke rose from the plastic muzzle, a word box from a comic appeared in the air. The words were exaggerated, and there were 3 exclamation marks. A large hole appeared in the chest of the Naga puppet. It was torn apart by an invisible force. Everything that was pointed at by the muzzle was instantly penetrated by a hole that stretched for several kilometers. However, Huaishi was not included in it. The moment before pulling the trigger, he coincidentally tilted his head and dodged the fatal blow. The crown wearer was stunned for a moment. Did I miss? In an instant, his figure dissipated. 2 more deformed figures rose from the shadows. Together with the Naga, they entangled Huaishi and launched a fierce attack. The crown wearer raised his hand again and pulled the trigger. Bang! Then it was crooked again. Like an acrobat, Huaishi's body strangely twisted into an S shape. In the midst of the siege, he easily blocked the storm with the hate water and even launched a counterattack. From the siege, he turned around and smiled mockingly at the direction of the gunshot. That's it. Can you do it? The resonance brought about by the mastery symphony was equivalent to a permanent perception buff. Like a bat, it would constantly detect any sound around it. No physical changes could escape his ears. Coupled with the premonition of death, it was enough for him to distinguish the fatal attack in the shortest time possible and dodge it. The crown wearer disappeared into the darkness again. He felt a sense of absurdity. This is the great Si Ming? This is clearly a F** King Xiangjun. It was not a matter of 1 level difference at all. It was just that the information he knew did not match the reality at all. The various soul weapons that Hades mentioned were nowhere to be seen. Just the iron rod alone was already frighteningly powerful. Moreover, there was this sonic boom that could throw Gandhara 7 or 8 streets away. Even if it was a calamity musician, wasn't this F** King ridiculous? The first thought that appeared in the crown wearer's mind was, Hades, that bastard, wants to sell me. The second thought was, *T, because in the dancing shadows behind the hidden crown wearer, a strange silhouette had quietly appeared. A dog. It's coming. It's coming with small steps. It flicked its tongue, drooled, and wagged its tail. Its ice-blue eyes, the size of light bulbs, were filled with eternal curiosity. It was already salivating. Can it be eaten? Is it tasty? How can it be eaten? No matter what, let's try taking a bite first. Before such a thought appeared, the body had already faithfully carried out the instinctive impulse and thought. The hunting dog suddenly expanded dozens of times, revealing the ferocious appearance of an infant bichimos. It opened its mouth, which smelled of sulfur, and suddenly closed it, tearing the shadows apart. Then, as if it had bitten into an iron plate, a spark burst out from the gap of its teeth. Then, it was overturned by a force that burst out of nowhere. The shadows boiled and shook violently. The silhouette of a huge creature rose rapidly from the deep darkness. The scales of the giant snake glowed with a dark purple light. Thousands of ferocious heads emerged from the shadows, surrounding and guarding the cold figure whose upper body had transformed into a long snake. It was a miracle that had solidified in hell, a disaster that had materialized into a physical entity, one of the objects of worship of the fallen Theravada monks. The giant snake, the poisonous dragon, the life-devouring demon. The wearer of the crown, Maharaga. The moment he appeared, the wearer of the crown, who had lost his patience, chose to go all out. Countless evil eyes shot out cold light. The snake's mouth opened and closed, and its voice was shrill and high-pitched. It called the name of its prey. Why, sure, there was no need for a response. As long as there was a thought, the soul would fall into the trap. In the blink of an eye, Huaishi's soul was completely open to him, allowing the poison of assimilation to erode it. Maharaga laughed loudly. Then he saw a disorderly, indescribable chaotic state of mind comparable to chaos. Countless thoughts that were unrelated to each other. Endless hunger emerged from Maharaga's senses. There was also a merciless desire to devour, a hunger that had never been cut off or satisfied in his life. Even the desire to hunt that seemed to be standing at the top of the food chain. Even Kiran was frightened by it. In the end, at the end of that eternal hunger, a solemn figure was revealed. A terrifying posture, as if wanting to devour hell. Just who was the wearer of the crown? Maharaga almost suspected that the person he was fighting against was the chosen one of the ranchers. Amidst his shock, he still retained his rationality. It was only in an instant that he reacted. No, this was obviously a misdirection by the other party. This was just a disguise. This was because there was another tiny response behind this response. He did not hesitate to cut off this false connection, and then reverse the connection between them to the real target. But this time, it was as if he had poked a hornet's nest. Before Maharaga's origin substance poison, which was strong enough to contaminate divinity, could spread, on the other side of the soul connection, there was a dark, bloody, vicious, ferocious, violent, strange, despairing, insane, hysterical, hateful, resentful, angry, painful, compassionate. Even if he used all the words he could think of to describe its true essence, the venom that swept over. It poured down. Countless serpent heads instantly deformed, rotted, and hissed in pain. Maharaga roared furiously, pustules appearing on his face one after another. His flesh melted, and clusters of gorgeous flowers grew continuously from his pale bones. At this moment, under the siege of countless puppets, even Huaishir was shocked. Where did this peerless philanthropist come from? He actually took the initiative to connect with his soul, sharing the contamination of his divinity and the mental erosion of the beast of eternal life. Could it be that he had misunderstood this wave? The other party was some hell charity association that had come to do a good deed? Or was it that he was the 10,000th lucky passenger of Helios and could enjoy the reward of gratitude? That's great, that's great. Everyone in hell was talented. They spoke well and did things reliably. He was about to fall in love with this place. If the other party could suddenly die on the spot, then he would be even happier. Unfortunately, after the other party sensed that something was wrong, he actually agreed to abandon many of the serpent heads. His body disintegrated and reassembled from the shadows, only sacrificing a portion of his origin substance and soul. Then, he endured the pain and pulled out his gun, pointing at Huaishir and pulling the trigger repeatedly. Bang! 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 Countless text boxes appeared on the screen like a flood, causing Huaishir to run for her life to dodge them. Under the gaze of countless evil eyes, the petrification curse finally took effect. Huaishir's movements paused for a moment, and then he was entangled by the tentacles that suddenly extended from the boiling shadows, unable to move. The crisis was imminent. At this moment, Huaishir heard an auditory hallucination. Tisk! It was full of dissatisfaction. It was as if it couldn't bear to see its junior in such a sorry state. Then, thunder burst out of the air. Hateful water roar. As if a fated enemy had appeared in front of its eyes. Majestic origin substance fluctuations emerged from the silent and unruly hateful water, causing Huaishir's living blood to swirl, turning into countless sharp blades that swept across. Then, it automatically extracted Huaishir's origin substance. Xiangjuan's divine mark activated, intensifying the origin substance that had merged with the blood, giving it a new qualitative change. Yinyang, she unreservedly displayed a peak-level technique that Huaishir had never discovered before. Watch carefully. This is how Xiangjuan's power is used. Just like the two levels of magnetism, when all the blood that had been bestowed with opposing origin substances merged, a blazing light burst forth from within. Thunder roared, and lightning flashed. Pillars of lightning that were strong enough to burn the naked eye rose from the ground, violently sweeping in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the omnipresent shadows were destroyed. Terrifying energy transformed into pure light and heat, scattering in all directions without reservation, illuminating Maharaga's shadowy state. A half-human, half-snake deformed body emerged from the shadows, exposed to the lightning. Maharaga screamed. It could feel the terrifying killing intent left behind by Lord Yinzhongjuan. However, the intense lightning filled with hatred and hostility could no longer be sustained. In just an instant, it had used up all of its accumulated power and was beaten back to its original state. It was an arrow at the end of its flight. Maharaga's 4 arms were still in front of him, but the destruction he had expected did not come. He froze for a long time. After so many years, he finally felt the horror and relief of having brushed shoulders with death. He couldn't help but laugh loudly. Then, he saw Huaishir 10 steps away. He was looking at himself, holding the silent water of hatred in his hand. He was filled with confusion and confusion. He didn't understand. What was this idiot laughing about? Maharaga's eyes darkened again. The shadows under his feet expanded again, once again transforming into endless darkness. Immediately afterwards, savage Nagas appeared one after another, fiercely attacking Huaishir. But his body suddenly began to disintegrate. He quickly sank into the shadows. He was going to leave. The setback from his probing made him realize that this prey was not as simple as he had expected. Even though he had already known that his target was difficult to deal with, this still exceeded his expectations. He didn't like this feeling. Even without the frightening lightning, this arrogant guy could only give himself a scraping. But his incomparably sharp instincts had begun to make him a little uneasy. Indeed, he still had many tricks up his sleeve. But Huaishir's strangeness made him decide to temporarily retreat and observe again, like a python strangling its prey bit by bit. This was just the beginning. He was not in a hurry. Instead, he had plenty of patience, waiting for his opponent to sink deeper and deeper into the swamp in constant anxiety, and finally suffocate to death in despair. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The moment he was within 10 steps, the outcome was already decided. Then, he heard a voice not far away. "I almost forgot," the young man sighed in realization. This is not the Discovery Realm. Surrounded by the puppets, he raised his hand unhurriedly. He snapped his fingers at Maharaga. He smiled. Bang! A clear onomatopoeic word came out of his mouth. But there was no sonic boom or loud noise. Only a wristband that looked like a smart watch silently fell off Huaishir's wrist. At that moment, the restriction of the Continuation Academy was lifted. In the darkness, Great Si Ming raised his cold eyes and loosened the shackles in his hands. Then the ultimate hummed. The residual poison from the element of destruction gushed out. Chapter 860. With the crisp snap of a finger, the sound of cloth tearing spread out. On Huaishir's right hand, the sleeve of the spacesuit suddenly burst open. On the half-fleshed metal right arm, countless tiny structures and hubs operated, stretching out its own complex structure. The casting furnace, hand of confinement, opened the door to the furnace's core. Then, the sound of a tsunami emerged from it. A low sound similar to the tremors of the earth, and the sweeping tides spread with the hurricane. Then, endless blood spurted out from every gap in the mechanical right hand. At first, it was like a frozen water pipe, then it became a leaking fire hydrant, then it was comparable to a high-pressure water cannon. Finally, it formed a terrifying torrent hundreds of times more powerful, rushing into the sky like a waterfall and spreading indiscriminately in all directions. Shadows, puppets, monsters, and even Maharaga, who was stunned. There was no room or leeway to dodge. In the blink of an eye, they were all covered in it. The texture of flesh and blood quickly emerged from the squirming scarlet. Countless slender nerves and blood vessels swayed in it like seaweed, attached to the fascia, and then twisted limbs rapidly grew. Like thousands of sticky hands, they frantically groped for everything within reach. They twitched and spasmed like they were on the verge of death. Wherever they passed, vein-like patterns grew on the rocks and the earth, and they quickly came to life. That was life. Life that had gone out of control multiplied in an instant. In the rolling shadows, the solidified ones who had been turned into puppets froze where they were, touched by the blood and wriggling tentacles. Then, their dead gray skin started to turn pink and white, and their hearts that had been dormant for many years started to beat again. But their limbs began to rapidly distort, dissolve, and liquefy. The only remaining bones embraced the torrent of life and threw themselves into it. They were clearly empty shells that had long lost their souls. However, the instincts that remained in the flesh caused the distorted faces to reveal ecstatic smiles. Life. Nothing was more precious than life. But now, Maharaga felt an indescribable horror from this incomparably precious existence. This was a trap of destruction. Hades, that guy, had indeed betrayed the true master and ruler of this world. He had betrayed the flute player and taken the initiative to join the Astronomy Society's camp. He wanted to kill him first. Now, the horrifying experience ran from his spine to the back of his head, causing him to scream in terror. Because of the surging sea of blood, Huaishir's arm was already raised towards him. The surging flesh and blood grew rapidly like congealed wax. Soon after, it turned into hundreds and thousands of thin and strange tentacles that pulled at him. The flesh and blood of the eternal beast instinctively chased after the existence with the strongest life force, the place with the most precipitation and calamity in the abyss, and the location of the one who wore the crown. On the strange, intertwining tentacles, countless nerves and fascia formed strange patterns that seemed to contain endless mysteries. Just a glance was enough to absorb all souls, making one involuntarily immerse themselves in the comprehension of life. Maharaga roared furiously, and the shadows quickly scattered, running in all directions like a pack of rats. However, the surging sea of blood had already swallowed up the shadows, tearing them apart. Life force poured in, causing the withered bones of countless puppets to grow once more, turning into dignified pillars of bones. Above the blood ocean, the outline of a solemn church was vaguely appearing. Just like a cage, there was nowhere for him to run. Using the origin substance to quickly escape and regenerate to recover was impossible for him to escape the surging sea of blood, the forest of bones, and the mountain of corpses. A boundless gravitational force spread out, tugging at his already solidified soul. The tentacles had already tightly wrapped around his body, no matter how hard he tried to resist. The instant they came into contact with each other, the scales melted and joined together. Then, an irresistible transformation began. No matter how much he screamed and struggled, the origin substance rapidly merged with this strange life force, causing it to rapidly expand, which in turn accelerated the erosion. Welcome a qualitative change. The wriggling flesh and blood on his body spread open a pair of wings like a sacred falcon, but it could not fly. His bones quickly regenerated, transforming into a savage ox skull, but there was no flesh or blood. Vigorous hair gathered together, forming the outline of a lion. It roared, but there was no sound. Finally, the flesh and nerves gathered together to form the shape of a human face, but there were no eyes. 4 ferocious creatures took root in Maharaga's stigmata, absorbing his power and growing rapidly, devouring his existence. No, don't. In the blink of an eye, Maharaga had completely dissolved, leaving behind only a skeleton that continued to crawl with great difficulty, constantly crying and praying. He recklessly dragged his half-dissolved body to the edge of the sea of blood. Just a little bit more and freedom would be in sight. An instant later, lightning once again burst forth from within the boundless sea of blood. After using up all of Huai Shi's origin substance, streaks of blazing light once again appeared above the sea of hatred, surging violently. Immediately afterwards, he exerted all of his strength. Accompanied by Huai Shi's roar, the flames shot through the air. The intense light disappeared in a flash, piercing through the sea of blood, the mountain of corpses, the forest of bones, and the gaps between the 4 living creatures. Immediately afterwards, it destroyed his body and nailed him to the ground. Finally, following Huai Shi's swift movements, the strange intelligent bracelet once again closed around Huai Shi's wrist. A crisp crack sounded out. Instantly, the sea of blood surged backwards. The 4 living creatures twitched and convulsed in pain, quickly petrified and disintegrated. They had not lived before, but were just false existences created by the element of destruction. Now that their vitality had been cut off, they could only rapidly wither and dissipate like plants whose roots had been cut off. Huai Shi's face was deathly pale. Great Si Ming's divinity pulled at the shackles with all its might, and the gravitational force of the ultimate rose again, sucking the flesh and blood of the beast of eternal life back into the furnace. Finally, the steel closed. The door was tightly shut again. The forest of bones collapsed into powder, the sea of blood evaporated without a trace, and the mountain of corpses turned into ashes. Only a foul stench remained in the air. It was the smell of decay. Huai Shi could not be bothered to hold his breath. He panted with all his might, and his back was already drenched in sweat. If he had a choice, he would never have chosen this self-destructing technique. Its corrosiveness was simply too terrifying, especially after absorbing most of Maharaga's life force. If it were not for the fact that he had obtained a large amount of essence cultivation from the Pill Wave inner circle a few months ago, increasing his divinity, Huai Shi would not have been able to contain it. If he had really allowed it to completely devour Maharaga, he would probably have suffered a calamity as well. This was all thanks to the sealed nature of the ultimate, which prevented him from getting burned by playing with fire. But after it had devoured such a large amount of origin substance, the countdown timer on Huai Shi's wrist had increased by another 5 months, and the texture and softness of his skin had appeared on his steel-like right arm. The degree of activation had increased. In order to deal with this damn thing, he would have to endure for another half a year. What huge loss! When he thought of this, Huai Shi felt a burst of rage. He did not even have time to catch his breath as he propped himself up and strode towards the still, struggling skeleton on the ground. Maharaga was still struggling. It was at death's door. It constantly reached out and tried to pull out the resentful water that had nailed itself to its chest, but it was scorched by the scorching lightning again and again. As it watched Huai Shi walk towards it step by step, it grew more and more panicked. It tried to shout out something, but its broken vocal cords were unable to express itself clearly. It did not matter whether it was praying, cursing, or begging. In the end, in its despair, that damaged face twitched with difficulty and squeezed out a humble smile. It struggled to move its lips, trying to speak. "Wait a moment, Then there was a bang. Its entire head had been hammered into the ground. The sound of thunder reverberated through the air. "Triple drummer, thunderclap. What the hell are you laughing at?" Huaisher yelled angrily. He once again raised his fist and punched out with all his might, smashing the rapidly healing face into pieces. Maharaga endured the pain and struggled to open its eyes. It wanted to say something, but the only thing that answered it was a cruel punch. "You're still laughing." There was no sympathy or pity at all. Huaisher did not feel the slightest bit of guilt for bullying children and beating up old people, especially this damn thing. Even if he killed it, he would be doing a good deed. How could he spare its life just because it was pitiful? Dream on. Seeing that it was able to quickly regenerate and heal after being penetrated by the hatred water, Huaisher would not give it any chance to stall for time. Kill it while it's sick. Go to hell. Not only did he punch and kick it, but he also picked up anything that could be used as a weapon, such as hammers, shovels, pots, bowls, and pans hanging outside the spacesuit. The more he hit it, the angrier he became. If it were not for the fact that his Great Sea Ming account had not been sealed, this thing would have died long ago, and there would be no need for scraping. In his anger, he beat it harder and harder. His fists hardened, but it was useless. No matter how hard Huaisher beat it, the crown wearer's vitality was still frighteningly tenacious, and it was still recovering rapidly. Seeing that Huaisher could not do anything to it, Maharaga became more and more surprised, and the smile on its face became more and more mocking. "You're just..." Before it could finish its words, a scream suddenly burst out. Because its arm, which had just healed, was torn apart by Huaisher's weapon. It collapsed into mud and could not be healed. Maharaga's smile froze. He looked in disbelief at the weapon in Huaisher's hand that had been drawn out in anger. On the strange rod-like object, dozens of Nordic alchemy runes were engraved all over it, and it was glowing with an incredible light and changing colors. And it was still vibrating. The pink rod shook, leaving behind afterimages, making it impossible to see its true outline. Under its attack and penetration, the crown wearer's proud regenerative ability was defeated like sand, and it was obliterated inch by inch. Unprecedented fear and panic rose in Maharaga's heart. He screamed in fear. "What the hell is this?" Huaisher was stunned for a moment, and then he replied with a trembling voice, "High-frequency power cutting sword. You've never seen it before, right? What the hell is a high-frequency power?" Maharaga vomited blood in grief and indignation. "Who are you trying to fool? This is clearly... You've never seen it before." Huaisher's sonorous and powerful voice interrupted his thoughts. He widened his eyes and said, "This is a high-tech sword that disintegrates the opponent at the particle and molecular level by vibrating the sword body." Huaisher clenched the hilt of her sword tightly and swung it down with all her might. "To be able to die under this sacred sword of mine, you should consider yourself lucky in your previous life." She continued to spout nonsense that she didn't even know what she was talking about. In an instant, the high-frequency power-cutting sword let out a high-pitched, buzzing sound. It was unstoppable. It was unstoppable. It tore Maharaga into pieces, collapsing inch by inch. In the end, it completely destroyed his stiff skull, leaving behind a twisted expression of disbelief. It was completely destroyed, dying without a complete corpse. Even in death, it could not accept the humiliation of dying under the high-frequency power-cutting sword. As the last strand of origin form dissipated, Maharaga welcomed its complete destruction. Immediately after, his shadow silently exploded, and a huge amount of weapons, poison, relics from the border, and even supplies sprayed out, scattering all over the ground in a dazzling golden light. Huaisher was dumbfounded. Was the drop rate of this game so high? Could it be the legendary True Legend? No one responded. In the dead silence, he stood rooted to the ground, looking down at the ashes of Maharaga at his feet, then at the high-frequency power-cutting sword in his hand. He sucked in a breath of cold air. How terrifying! He had wronged the skeleton. This really was a divine weapon that could protect himself. But without waiting for Huai Shi to apologize and cherish it, the light on the sword quickly dissipated after the enemy was eliminated. Then it began to vibrate intermittently. Under Huai Shi's astonished and admiring gaze, a crack appeared on the sword body. It was broken. Broken? It was actually broken. How could this divine weapon be a one-time use item? After all, this thing was made of plastic and of poor quality. Huai Shi had swung and smashed in his hand. How could it withstand such abuse? He widened his eyes and looked at the broken hilt in his hand, as well as the two No. 4 batteries in the crack. He suddenly felt an indescribable heartache. He almost burst into tears. For a moment, he didn't even pay attention to the lousy dog next to him who was secretly eating. In just a few seconds, this lousy dog had almost finished eating all the equipment dropped by Maharaga. Moreover, it was still licking its lips as it looked at Huai Shi's right hand, drooling. It even wanted to. By the time he realized what had happened, Huai Shi was about to die of anger. This dog was a real dog. It had been slacking off when it was fighting monsters. After the monsters were killed, it had even eaten all the equipment. There really wasn't anything left. It was only now that the rumbling sound of a handcart came from afar. It was a skeleton. It had come late. A doggy, don't be afraid. Sitting on his handcart, he waved the frying pan in his hand and shouted passionately, "I'll help you, la. It was obviously a skeleton, and only half of it was left, but it was so brave. It even shouted slogans like strength and glory and fight to the death. Where did this brave soul come from? Unfortunately, by the time it arrived, everything was over. It couldn't be blamed for slacking off. After all, it didn't have legs by the time it climbed out of the furnace core, got on its beloved handcart, and finally rushed onto the battlefield. The battle was already over. It took less than 2 minutes. Big brother, don't be so brave, okay? What if Maharaga isn't dead yet? Why are you rushing over in such a hurry? Huai Shi covered his face with his hand and sighed. When he lowered his head, he saw the remains of half a divine artifact in his hand. He looked at the skeleton with great anticipation. Is there still such a good thing? He raised his head and was about to speak. His movements suddenly stopped. His expression changed. In the distance, at the end of the graveyard, in the darkness, there was an undisguised killing intent. It was as if it was deliberately giving Huai Shi enough time to react. The newcomer slowly took the longbow from his back, pulled the bowstring, and then let go. A shrill whistle burst forth. Huai Shi only had time to see a ray of light that resembled a meteor flash past. Then he heard a roar burst forth in his ears. An arrow had already pierced through the air. It crossed a long distance and pierced through the frying pan in the skeleton's hand like a hot knife through butter. Then it brushed past Huai Shi's ear and flew into the darkness behind him. After piercing through several layers of planks, after a distance of several thousand meters, it was nailed to the body of a descending spirit, making a buzzing sound. Did the arrow miss? No, it was disdain and a sneak attack. It was a fair and above-board warning. What a good battle. It makes one's blood boil. In the darkness, a burly figure more than 3 meters tall stepped forward. His footsteps were low and deep. He raised his voice and said to Huai Shi, "It's a pity that we have to take advantage of the situation and take away the life of such a brave warrior." A light from somewhere illuminated his figure. Huai Shi froze in place. 3 minutes ago, at the core of Helios, the door opened with a bang. That trash Maharaga. He still underestimated the enemy. Hades's face was gloomy. He reported to the outline of the god in the light. "You need to be on guard early. He's no less a threat than Garland." "I know." The person who was once called Publius replied, "I've already seen it." And he said calmly, "I've already sent out the most outstanding copy. There won't be any mistakes." Hades was stunned for a moment. He couldn't believe it. "When did you finish?" "Just now." The outline in the light lowered his eyes. "This is fate." This was a link of fate. At this moment, 3 kilometers away, in the dark graveyard, Huai Shi finally saw the appearance of the newcomer. He was more than 3 meters tall, with bronze skin and a dignified face, like a legendary giant. On his full muscles, which could be called a work of art, was a bright golden breastplate. On his shoulders was a cape made of lion skin. On his back, in addition to a quiver of arrows, there was also a bronze shield and a short sword at his waist. With a longbow in his hand, he looked majestic. It was as if a hero of the demigod had walked out of legend and stepped into reality. He stood in front of Huaishur and became his enemy. He was a warrior who had established his great achievements and fame over a long period of time. Other than him, who else could have such an attitude? In the silence, Huaishur suddenly whispered, "Hercules." Chapter 861. Hercules, the Greek legend, the son of Zeus, the creator of the 12 unparalleled feats. A hero, a demigod with divine blood flowing through his veins. Even Hercules. The moment the light appeared, Huaishur was dumbfounded. Countless titles appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but tremble. It wasn't excitement, but fear, awe, because the unreachable peak was standing right in front of him, challenging him, wanting to kill him here. Hercules was so resolute and unshakable that even from a distance, he could still feel the awe-inspiring fighting spirit, the high fighting spirit, and the iron will that would never retreat or show mercy. Why? The moment this thought appeared, it was answered, because he was Publius' enemy, and Publius had received orders to kill him. The crown was just an insignificant appetizer, not even as important as the arrow just now. It was just a warning, just like the horn at the beginning of the battle. So who was he? It wasn't that he doubted Hercules' identity, but that he didn't believe that the legendary Hercules would appear in front of him. Gods had died, including Hercules himself. In that case, the thing in front of him must be the result of Publius' technology. It could be called a living record of events, a divine mark with intelligence, or perhaps a combination of both. That was the essence of Publius' current existence. Through the extraction of divinity, he had completed the replication of the legendary hero of the past. Based on this refinement and application of divinity and origin substances, Publius was indeed a renowned master of origin substances. When he learned that the opponent was not Hercules himself, Huaishur couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But at most, he had gone from certain death to certain death. An exhausted Hercules and an uninjured Hercules? Huaishur didn't even dare to think that he could win. So, how about using words to shake Publius? Stall for time? Call for Tangi for help? None of those were likely to happen. There was no room for words or negotiations. Publius would never leave such a loophole. Perhaps Hercules even knew that he had set a new record. Stalling for time was even more impossible. Publius would not give him a chance. And Tangi still hadn't appeared, so she probably couldn't get away. In other words, the only ones facing Hercules were himself, a dog, and half a skeleton. Thinking of this, Huaishur became more and more desperate. In that case, the only chance of victory was the flesh and blood of the beast of eternal life in his ultimate. Huaishur subconsciously clenched his right hand, looking for an opportunity to get closer. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something to attract the other party's attention and create an opportunity. But when Huaishur took a step forward, Hercules' sharp eyes fell on his right hand. He was extremely vigilant. "I'm sorry, warrior." He pulled the bowstring slightly. "If you have anything to say, please stay where you are." In this way, he easily saw through Huaishur's thoughts. Hercules said, "The blood of Typhon in your hands is too dangerous." Huaishur smiled indifferently, but he did not move forward. He just looked at his right hand. Would the mighty Hercules be afraid of such a thing? The flesh and blood of the ancestor of all demons is not something a fourth generation like me can touch. Hercules replied calmly. In the whole of Olympus, perhaps only Dionysus would be crazy enough to come into contact with that kind of thing. What's more, my body is not complete and still has flaws. In this way, Hercules openly admitted that he was not in his prime state, which was in line with Huaishur's guess. At this moment, Hercules in front of Huaishur had probably just completed the later stage of the 12 unparalleled feats and had not sublimated his divinity to become Hercules. Otherwise, if Publius had simply created Hercules, why would he still hide in the core and not move? Through the terrifying enemy created by the Greek divinity in front of Huaishur, plus the blessing of Helios himself, Huaishur suddenly had a thought. The principle of alchemy was to give up something when you gain something. In order to create a real god, the hell on Helios had been created. And in order to create Hercules, what had he created? No, what had Publius created Hercules to create? Apollo. Huaishur suddenly understood. Publius is about to complete Apollo. Helios was the sun chariot, which preserved the mysteries and heritage of the Greek gods. Its interior naturally had the characteristics of Olympus. Recreating the god of light, Apollo, who had a close relationship with Helios, was definitely the best choice. The origin of Hercules might have come from this. He was a fragment extracted and stripped from the purest divinity of Apollo. Hercules smiled, but did not comment. Honorable warrior, I am the son of Zeus, the inheritor of the blood of Olympus, and the one who Hera gave glory to. The demigod hero pulled the bowstring, aimed at the enemy in front of him, and asked solemnly, "Tell me your name." Huaishur sighed and clenched the water of hatred in his hand. He did not intend to answer. At that moment, lightning burst out. The remaining source substance was transformed by the water of hatred and was once again divided into yin and yang. Then, as the surging living blood merged, the yin and yang complemented each other. A fierce light appeared, and violent lightning burst out from his hand. And even before that, Hercules had already pulled the bowstring to its fullest. He solemnly declared, "Praise the great divine light." The sunfire converged into an arrow and shot out. Even though it was far away, it brought with it a premonition of death. The terrifying majesty shocked Huaishur to the spot, making it difficult for him to dodge. He could only watch in astonishment as the fanatical light approached inch by inch. Then it illuminated the silhouette of the skeleton in the middle. That idiot. He had actually rushed forward. Did he have no brain? No, that guy had no brain to begin with. Huaishur widened his eyes in astonishment. He reached out, but it was too late. Kill. Waving the broken pan in his hand, the skeleton let out a sharp, strange cry. He actually sat on his small handcart and charged toward the demigod in the distance. Boom! With a loud bang, the light of the sunfire pierced Huaishur's eyes. The fragments of the handcart were ignited and instantly melted into charred plastic. Only a few broken wheels rolled out of the flames and landed at Huaishur's feet. In the dead silence, Huaishur stared blankly at the charred wheels beside him. He raised his eyes to look at Hercules, and his eyes gradually turned red. Then he heard a bang and a scream of ouch. Half of the skeleton fell from the sky, still holding the red-hot pan. Half of its body was charred black, and it rolled on the ground in a sorry state. As it scraped the floor, the charred black on the skeleton's body was scraped away, revealing the jade-like white bones underneath. It took a direct hit from the demigod's arrow, and even the great rotor did not fall. It was not damaged at all. How'd I fly up? The skeleton looked up blankly and looked around, puzzled. Where's my car? Where's my car? Was this the terrifying strength of the comedic type? In the silence, Huaishur sucked in a breath of cold air and froze in place. Hercules was also stunned in place. Seeing that the two were stunned, the skeleton was also stunned. The three of them looked at each other. Then Huaishur looked at the intact skeleton, and suddenly, he smiled at Hercules. He suddenly had a bold idea. Hercules' expression suddenly changed. The dome turned over, just like the shaking of heaven and earth. At this moment, a terrifying disaster comparable to the overlapping of creation and destruction once again burst out from Helios. The seed of Gaia had already completed the first step of germination by absorbing the blood of the son of Leviathan. The ecosphere, it evolved, converged into a ring. With the change of this essence, it quietly enveloped the entire Helios and shrank inward inch by inch. In the sea of nothingness and the cloud of Gaia, a mighty whale's song came. And in the core of Helios, in the light of glory, the silhouette of Publius looked down. It was as if he had raised a finger slightly. The sun and moon of nothingness orbited around Helios, and their positions suddenly changed. Then the earth shook, and the scorching sun turned dark like a felt. Blood dripped from the bright moon. The illusory light of the stars of nothingness fell inward, just like the fig tree being shaken by a strong wind, and unripe fruits fell. It caused the dome of the Gaia ring to shift, like a scroll turning over, the ocean rolling and losing its original position. Hailstones and fire mixed with blood were thrown on the ground, burning 1/3 of the ground and 1/3 of the trees. All the grass was also burned. Burning stars emerged from the void and fell toward the blood-colored sea in the Gaia ring, triggering a huge impact and pollution of the disaster. At this moment, every inch of Helios seemed to have become a tool for the two sides to fight. Every screw and every piece of the deck had its own will, attacking each other mercilessly. So that's how it is? In the empty furnace core, Tangi leaned on the heart chamber of Helios, looking down at the battle between her idiot and the demigod hero. She nibbled on melon seeds and nodded casually. Then it's not easy for you. Next to her, the little white mouse waved its 2 front paws and was chirping at Tangi. Sometimes it made fierce gestures, and sometimes it made a pitiful look. It was as if it was playing several roles, recounting its tragic experience and pouring out the resentment in its heart to Tangi. I'm just a passerby. No matter how you think about it, you deserve it, okay? Tangi shrugged without pity. You even dare to freeload on the elemental of destruction. No matter how brainless you are, you won't go to this extent. No matter what the reason is, allowing the Pied Piper to infect and spread will inevitably lead to collective madness and self-destruction. Even if you can't stand the group of parasites who monopolize Helios and treated it as a rare commodity, there's no need to trade with them, right? The little white mouse whimpered twice and curled up, looking lonely and teary. It was very pitiful. Tangi looked over with a smile and looked at it. So pitiful. You must cry for a long time after a punch, right? The little white mouse shivered and curled up into a ball. From a miracle engraving of the sun chariot to a little white mouse, and you still have to rely on the brain hole of your enemy to survive. You really have a mind of your own. Tangi spat out 2 pieces of melon seeds and handed over the cracked melon seeds. Do you want to eat? The little white mouse froze for a moment and tentatively leaned forward. Then the melon seeds were taken back. Tangi laughed. No, just as the little white mouse looked at her with grief and indignation. She opened her mouth and threw the melon seeds into her mouth. She tasted envy and fear, narrowed her eyes, and was very happy. Do your job well, she suddenly said. After this is done, I will give you freedom. My promise is different from those guys in Olympus who swear like drinking water. You should understand the weight of it. The little white mouse froze for a moment in disbelief. It seemed to be ecstatic. Then, it heard the second half of Tangi's sentence. If this is not done, I will kill your whole family. The beautiful and dignified figure looked back and seemed to be smiling. Don't worry. If you don't have a whole family, I will take you to the White Mouse Breeding Center. I will help you gather a whole family and then kill them together. In the silence, the little white mouse let out a whimper. It lowered its head and shrunk back, shivering. Tangi did not seem to care. She looked away and continued to watch the battle between her contractor and the demigod below. She was full of joy. Behind her, the book of steel hovering in the air was still trembling quietly. Countless cables extended out from between the pages of the book and sank into Helios's port. Countless characters flowed from the cover at twice the speed. A drop of oil like cold sweat slid down the title page. Before it dripped, it was sucked back in horror. The speed increased again, faster and faster. It was so fast that Beelzebub did not dare to imagine it. Not long after, the book of steel vibrated again, and a stuttering, flattering voice was heard. Your Majesty, all the matrices and modern equipment of Helios have been connected. The hidden interference of the fourth layer of the secret apparatus has been completed. All interfaces are open. Oh, well done. Tangi put down the chips in her mouth and raised her hand to pat the title page of Lord of the Flies. Go back and ask my contractor to add another gigabit of Wi-Fi for you. I wouldn't dare. Beelzebub suppressed his surprise and answered carefully. You're welcome. You're paying for the internet anyway. Remember to pay the electricity and water bills when you go back. It's not easy for Feng Shu to make money. Don't eat and use them all the time. Tongji patted the mature incident record in her hand and moved closer before asking curiously, That's right, the annualized income of the few financial funds that I've been operating for you recently doesn't seem to be too good. Are you in a relationship now? I'm so nice to you. Why don't you focus on your work? 16% is not enough? Are you human? Beelzebub silently swallowed the 2 lines of tears. He suddenly missed the carefree and happy life when he was a router. At least he didn't have to be an investment machine and worry about the annualized income every day. How many pages of books had turned white? How many threads had been lost? Every night, he would wake up from the nightmare of the scallops running away. He would look up at the big plate, heave a sigh of relief, and fall asleep again. When he dreamed of a beautiful world without scallops, he could not help but cry. A child without Orton was like a blade of grass. Why am I so miserable? Anyway, the profits are all used to buy your body and equipment. I've already ordered the materials. Tangi waved the list on the phone screen and sighed helplessly. Seeing that you're so unmotivated, I can't do anything. I'm afraid you won't be able to pay the rest. What? Beelzebub was stunned. And he was overjoyed. It was as if the scallops that ran away had returned. Each of them had gained half a kilogram. They even gave birth to children. They even gave birth to 2 at once. And both of them were pregnant. Endless motivation emerged from the records of the Book of Steel. The high fighting spirit turned into a burning flame, illuminating the beautiful tomorrow. It was easy to turn 30 years into 50 years, but it was not a dream. Osiris, I'm coming. Beelzebub instantly turned into a bootlicker, ready to bootlick. But after Tangi glanced at him, he did not dare to speak anymore. Her face that had always been smiling had somehow regained its calmness and coldness. It was majestic and indifferent, as if she was looking down at everything from top to bottom. She stared at the fixed fate. Everything would eventually turn to dust. When she raised her finger, the Book of Steel suddenly expanded and rapidly expanded, turning into a huge cube filled with arrays and circuits. Electricity kept jumping. This was still a folded form, because its true appearance was far bigger than its current size. Osiris's underworld engine arrived here. When she looked back, the trembling little white mouse curled up into a ball, rolled, and fell into the groove of Beelzebub's underworld engine. Countless cables connected to each other. They turned into origin substance and sank into its small body, extracting the great soul within. The will that belonged to Helios was operating here. At that moment, a third voice of disagreement emerged from the battle between the 2 masters. At this moment, it was right in front of the underworld engine. Tangi raised her hand. And so, the Book of Destiny and Huaishi's soul responded to the summons and flipped silently. Between the countless pages, miraculous records flowed out. It illuminated her eyes and a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. I'll let you see, Huaishi, the true usage of the Book of Destiny. Tangi's eyes looked down, igniting the brilliance of the huge, secret instrument. Revision of events begin. Chapter 862. When the light shone, the world fell into darkness again, because there was no color in the entire cemetery that could compete with the blazing light. Light shines all over the world by the power of God. Following Hercules' declaration, a blazing stream of light gathered on the bowstring and shot forward. The speed was far faster than the recognition of the naked eye and human reflexes, almost equivalent to the speed of light. The moment the arrow was shot, it had already hit the target, and then there was nothing. Kill! The skeletons shouted fanatically, as if possessed by the spirit of war, waving the half-melted pan in its hand. Except for the skull being burned black, it was unscathed. After suffering such a huge impact, it did not even have any symptoms of a concussion. It was probably because it did not have a brain at all. It was full of fighting spirit. Huaishur, on the other hand, felt that his hand was about to break. At this moment, he was holding the skeleton spine as if he was holding a large shield. He shrank back and firmly protected the vital parts of his body. The premonition of death would tell him where the attack came and when in an instant, helping him resist the fatal attack of the sunfire arrow. It was just a little hot, a little scalding. It had burned the spacesuit that could withstand the long-distance radiation of a star head-on, exposing his steel-like right arm. The iron arm had a burning red color. If it were anyone else, they would have been boiling with excitement, but Huaishur was not worried at all. Not to mention the resistance of the trapped hand, which had now become a casting furnace. To high temperatures, the flesh and blood of the eternal beast in the ultimate would not be affected by such a low temperature at all. Huaishur even hoped that it could shoot more to help him strengthen his digestive function. In just a few minutes, the high temperature of the sunfire arrow and the purification attribute contained in it had completed the work that Huaishur needed to do for several months. It had helped him eliminate a large wave of activity of the Eternal Beast spawn organization. Good stuff, really good stuff. He was simply the great Samaritan of Olympus. At this moment, Huaishur looked at Hercules with eyes full of gratitude. He could not wait to cheer for him and asked him to shoot more to help him rescue the SEAL main account as soon as possible. Being grateful, and touched were all different things, but that didn't mean that he didn't have to fight back. After withstanding a wave of sunfire arrows, Huaishur waved the water of hatred in his hand. Without the need for thunder, a steady stream of living blood turned into a rain of blood and rained down on Hercules. It was useless, but even if it could not kill him directly, the venom in it was enough to make him suffer. Hercules' teacher, Sharon, claimed to be immortal, but he was still tortured by the venom. The dancing blood had obviously caused a lot of trouble for the opponent. Like annoying mosquitoes, they could not be driven away or killed, but they could easily rise from the ashes. Wherever they passed, colorful traces of fungi would grow on the ground, and the air would become sweet. Hercules could not help but recall the Hydra's lair, the poisonous fog and suffocation that could be seen everywhere. Every time this happened, he would habitually reach for his waist, but he couldn't find the copper jar that contained the Medusa's head. Otherwise, as long as he raised that head, all of his annoying opponents would be defeated without him even needing to attack. Even a great grandmaster would not be able to take care of everything in such a short time. After Hercules was almost at his peak, he had no spare energy to take care of the God-given armaments. Seeing Huaishur repeatedly probing at the edge of the battlefield, as well as the idiotic skeleton in his hand, the warrior's blood that was originally boiling could not help but boil with rage. Why did Puberus leave behind such an unreliable avatar? Don't you feel ashamed? Hercules asked angrily. Ashamed? How to write it? Do you Argo people teach me? Huaishur sneered and raised the skull even more vigorously. She retorted in a trembling voice. Moreover, this is my blood brother from a different mother. How is helping each other shameful? Hercules was taken aback. The skeleton was also taken aback, and then it was pleasantly surprised. It turned its head 180 degrees to look at Huaishur. Is that true, doggy? Could it be that this was his own brother? No wonder he looked so familiar. Being stared at by those eyes filled with joy and passion, it was Huaishur who couldn't hold it in anymore. Anyway, it doesn't matter if we are friends or not. This is the fetters of the soul. Do you know what fetters are? Huaishur raised his head and said shamelessly, We, the Yellow Mountain, will advance and retreat together. If you come alone, there will be two of us. If you Argo heroes come together, there will be two of us. As soon as he said that, Hercules, one of the few decent members of the Greek troublemaking group Argo, was speechless. After all, those who dared to say such strange things to him in the past had basically been beaten to death by him. At the same time, he felt a sense of recognition and déjà vu toward the unscrupulous style of his opponent in front of him. It seemed that he had seen it somewhere before. However, the so-called battle should be like this, right? It did not matter whether it was despicable or glorious. Glory and victory were only for the strong, and the weak only deserved dust and death. On the contrary, it was Hercules who was so rigid about the so-called noble bloodline that he had forgotten the most precious experience of the past and the determination to grow. Hercules was alerted. This was a solemn duel that was worthy of being dedicated to Ares. How could he be timid in the face of such an enemy? If that's the case, in a brief silence, Hercules pondered for a moment, as if he had made up his mind. Hwaishur was so scared that he trembled in place, thinking that Hercules was really going to summon people. He was afraid that if Hercules whistled, a dozen powerful heroes would fall from the sky. After all, there were 30 to 40 heroes on the Argo, not counting the ones with the same name. But soon he saw it. Hercules finally put away his longbow. Before Hwaishur could breathe a sigh of relief, he saw Hercules take off the shield engraved with monsters and mountains and pull out the short sword at his waist. On the handle of the bronze, twin snakes intertwined. A ray of golden light lit up in the gem of the snake eyes. Just like that, he raised the shield and held the short sword in his hand. Ignoring the threat of the destructive elements, he took a step forward. He walked straight toward Hwaishur. At that moment, Hwaishur felt the roar between the bursts. It was like the roar of the sky and the earth. It was the high-pitched battle cry from the demigod hero, a declaration of war that was above the tremors of the earth and the loud noise of the air breaking. Hwaishur subconsciously wanted to retreat, but then he saw a huge shadow appear in front of him. The distance of 3 kilometers was crossed in the blink of an eye. The huge shadow shrouded Hwaishur's face. Hercules raised his right hand. Hwaishur's pupils contracted instantly. In an instant, he collected his pulse, heartbeat, and even the sound of the source form. He unified the pulse of the earth under his feet and briefly connected with himself as if they had become one. He raised the skull and met the falling short sword. Mastery, symphony. The roar burst out in an instant. The skull shook violently. The terrible shock and the sweeping hurricane were like high-pressure water knives, cutting off the burn marks and ashes on its body. Hercules was unscathed, as expected of a grandmaster. But Hwaishur's spacesuit shook again, tearing several big holes. Half of his body was bleeding. He was severely injured by this decisive blow and could not breathe. His mind was buzzing. The countless surging plans and thoughts were all shattered by this terrible blow, leaving only an indescribable shock. The only thought kept circling, bringing indescribable horror. So this was Hercules? No, not only that. Because Hercules in front of Hwaishur disappeared without a trace again. The sound of Supreme told him that Hercules had appeared behind him, and the short sword was aimed at his neck. Decapitation. Without thinking, and without caring about the hidden injuries on his skin and bones, Hwaishur held the hateful water in his hand upside down, rolling the living blood. Lightning burst out. Layers of living blood shields were smashed with irresistible force. Then, the sword slashed on the hateful water, breaking the posture of the hateful water and smashing it on Hwaishur's neck. If the hateful water's material was not hard enough, perhaps the sword would have cut off the hateful water and then cut off Hwaishur's head. Hwaishur's vision turned black, and he felt that his neck was going to break. Then the earth roared. Countless cracks spread out from the sword, extending for hundreds of meters. Hwaishur's heel had been knocked into the ground, and she was like a nail that could not be pulled out. This was the conduction of the symphony. Most of the power was channeled through the living blood into the cemetery under his feet. But before Hwaishur could catch his breath, Hercules behind him disappeared again. He appeared in front of Hwaishur when he was unprepared. Again, Hwaishur was dumbfounded. How did you do it? The short sword whistled out like flowing mercury, leaving a brilliant and dazzling iron light in the air, extending straight forward. At the critical moment, a huge wolfhound emerged from the darkness. After hiding in the darkness for a long time, it suddenly launched an attack. It opened its mouth, stretched its neck, and bit Hercules' arm. Sparks burst between its teeth and the vambrace, causing cracks to appear on its sharp teeth. The armor forged by the god of fire, even without divinity and blessings from the gods, was still extremely hard, but did not let go. It clamped down on Hercules' attack. The change was sudden, but Hercules' expression did not change. The moment the short sword was clamped, Hercules lifted his leg and kicked Huaishi's defense. The power above the battering ram burst out in an instant. The skeleton that acted as a shield and Huaishi were kicked into the air. In the air, they flew backward like cannonballs, smashing through layers of tombstones, all the way back, drawing a tragic gully and smashing into the broken furnace core. Plumes of smoke rose into the air. Huaishi lay paralyzed on top of the ruins, coughing up large mouthfuls of blood. The skeleton had already flown off somewhere. Through the gradually dissipating smoke and dust, he saw a burly figure suddenly waving his hand. After flipping over the entangled wolfhound, the figure walked toward him step by step. His whole body was cold. The premonition of death was screaming loudly. But at that moment, he recalled how Hercules had attacked the enemy from 3 different angles without any gap in time and without any common sense. Supreme, he blurted out subconsciously. As he moved forward, Hercules seemed to be puzzled. He looked down at the short sword in his hand and immediately understood. Are you talking about the blow just now? That is the holy oath that my teacher taught me. It seems that you also know a similar technique, right? Such crude swordsmanship. What a joke. It was as if he was deeply regretful. It was unfair to let the warrior fall to the ground and die. Because he was not in his complete state, this body could not exert the power of his heyday. He could not reproduce the skill of cutting off all 9 heads of the Hydra at the same time in an instant. Huaishi could not help but roll his eyes. He felt that the crisis of death, which was greater than just now, broke out again. This time, other than getting up, he had no strength to defend himself. But when he felt the operation of the Book of Destiny in his soul, he could not help but smile. His heart suddenly calmed down. He was full of confidence. Yes, he still had one last trick that he had not used. The trump card that could determine the outcome of the battle. At that moment, when Hercules broke through the air again, Huaishi's mind no longer had any fear. His consciousness was extremely focused, like flowing water, reflecting everything in his soul. He even closed his eyes. He smiled, fearless of death. Just that, he took a deep breath, then, in a loud sound of breaking through the air, he shouted loudly, "Tangi, save me!" Bang! The sound of steel colliding burst out. At that moment, Hercules raised his eyes in shock. His green eyes were illuminated by the light in front of him. He could not believe it. It was Huaishi's arm. The steel arm blocked in front of the dagger blessed by Hermes, fearless of the impact and attack from Hercules, and swallowed all the power contained in it. It did not break before the power that could destroy the iron wall. It was not damaged by the unparalleled sharpness. A small sound came from it. Countless small pivots operated together with a complicated structure, causing the heavy steel arm to quickly disintegrate and unfold, revealing the transformation structure that contained countless mysteries. This time, the power of the element of destruction did not burst out, because a more powerful force had descended, suppressing the flesh and blood of the beast of eternal life and igniting the fire in the ultimate once again. Forge, hand of confinement, activate. The pale alchemy fire rose from the divinity of great Si Ming and turned into the radiance of refining miracles. It was a radiance different from the glorious miracle of Apollo, but had the presence of Prometheus' sin. That was the ambition to steal divine power and recreate the world. At that moment, when the forge was activated, the entire tomb fell into a violent tremor. A powerful force burst out of thin air, like a torrent descending from the sky and swallowing everything. Then, under the illumination of the alchemy fire, countless steel roared loudly. Huaishi's soul was overloaded with terrifying efficiency and power that he had never imagined. It was as if he had turned himself into the core of the universe, the source of all things, and used it to control the changes in the world. The meaning of innovation and change flowed from it. And the cold had descended on every place, causing the ceiling to collapse with a roar. Countless steel slanted down like a rainstorm. The earth trembled and cracked as countless substances emerged from it, just like the eruption of a volcano. The extension of heaven and earth collided in an instant, closed and connected with each other. Like two tightly clenched palms, it formed a majestic skeleton that could not be shaken. Countless dazzling miracles emerged from it, causing all the steel to melt and turn into flowing water, flowing up the skeleton, gathering, expanding, extending, and finally forming a majestic entity. It was a tower that rose from the deepest part of the earth, as if it wanted to pierce through the entire Helios. Just behind Huaishi, in a short moment, it rose from the ground and descended from the sky. And in the center of the tower, the alchemy fire emitted a cold radiance. From that moment on, there was no more darkness in the dark sky, but it did not regain its brightness either. The overly dazzling light and the overly deep darkness were all swallowed by the tower, leaving only the dim light with a faint blood-red color. It was like the setting sun. At that moment, under the illumination of the setting sun, there were ashes that fell silently in the wind, turning into fine snow. It was filled with a familiar aura. Huaishi could not help but recall. This is Hercules paused for a moment, but the changes in front of him were not enough to shock him. The moment his attack missed, he launched a new round of attacks. But his movements were inexplicably stiff on the spot. In the shadow of the furnace core ruins, his body quickly emerged with a grayish-white color, as if he had been petrified. But when he struggled hard and broke through the shadow, his skin and lush hair instantly fell into a high temperature, as if he had been thrown into an oven and ignited with flames. It was as if he had been cursed by light and shadow. The turmoil did not stop there. The moment the tower was established, there were many changes accompanied by loud noises, as if countless huge machines were working, causing the iron dome and giant pillars to rise from the ground, forming complex buildings one after another, forming a terrifying maze that could imprison the Minotaurs. And in this sudden change, Huaishi was also stunned on the spot. He slowly turned back and looked at the towering tower behind him. He could not help but pinch his chin. His smile became happier. Although he did not know what had happened, he felt that it was a good thing. And he turned back, bowed to the demigod hero not far away, and introduced, "Welcome to the land of dusk." At this moment, no, to be precise, it was only 5 seconds later that the Discovery Mirror observed this terrifying change from the outermost side. Just as the two great grandmasters were fighting with all their might, the third secret ritual that appeared above Helios. The flowing silver light gushed out from the axis of Helios and spread out in an instant, right above the eye of Jupiter. It spread rapidly, and wherever it passed, whether it was the ring of Gaia or the fictional celestial bodies, they were all covered. It formed a perfect sphere that encompassed the entire Helios and spanned thousands of kilometers. Amidst the countless rays of light, a precise and complicated grid appeared above the circle. Starting from the two ends of the axis, it accurately divided everything within, drawing boundaries and regions that could not be crossed. After suppressing all disputes and turmoil, he tyrannically began a transformation that could not be disobeyed. It was just like the brilliant sun moving on its own trajectory. The divine power of Helios finally emerged at this moment, following that will, and completely changed its form. A complex divine projection emerged from it. First, a light source of nothingness rose from it, turning into a pure ring of sun, with the core of Jupiter and Helios as a line, hanging high from the outside. Then, the projection of the giant elephant that carried the world appeared from the void, carrying the heavy Helios. but it still could not support this complicated secret ritual. So, in the eye of Jupiter that could swallow the entire Discovery realm, the outline of a giant turtle faintly appeared, holding up the outline of the giant elephant. Just like that, it soared freely above the storm. Even though it was just a projection of nothingness, it still carried a sense of horror that made one's hair stand on end. The moment this decisive secret ritual was established, the silver light that had swallowed Helios began to collapse inch by inch, moving downwards at an incredible speed. In the end, the appearance that was revealed was completely different from the past. As if returning to the era of the gods, the once devastated sun chariot had bloomed like a lotus flower, turning into a giant disc-shaped ship without any obstruction. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Wow! At this moment, on the edge of the tower, the skull that was hung there looked up at the brilliant stars in the vacuum and could not help but clap its little hands. It sighed sincerely. So cool. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.